afternoon. Welcome to Camden Yards for the, no, excuse me, welcome to Harris Hall. That's for Commissioner Lycan. Welcome to Harris Hall for the afternoon session of the September 19th Board of County Commissioners meeting. We have a 1:30 a.m. time certain, Mr. Mokrahisi, PM, excuse me, time certain, Mr. Mokrahisi, that we'll step straight into. The item number one on this afternoon's agenda, which is item number 11A on your public agenda, is an ordinance number 23-06 in the matter of amending lane code to establish an erosion policy effective January 1st, 2024, LC 9.090.005 through 9.090.065, LC 10.091, LC 11.016, and LC 16.096. This is a public hearing on a county-initiated application to amend the county's code. And as I've stated already, the date today is September 19th, 2023, and the order of proceedings for this hearing will be first to hear the report by staff, followed by public testimony, followed by additional comments by staff, and interspersed in there will be commissioner questions or comments for staff. Then at this point in time, we'll be moving forward with a disclosure from commissioners or abstentions due to conflicts of interest or bias. I'll call in order from my left to right. Commissioner Laval.
No, nothing to declare.
Commissioner Buck.
None.
Vice Chair Trigger.
None.
Commissioner Senega.
None.
And I have none also. Are there any challenges to the board's qualifications to hear the matter? Any challenges online, Ms. Jones? I hear none.
So far, I do not have anyone online at this time.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Then, Mr. Mokrahisi, we'll move forward with a report from staff, and I'll ask you to introduce your panel and present the report from staff.
I'm going to turn this over to Dan Hurley, our Public Works Director, to kick it off.
Thanks, Steve. Good afternoon, Commissioners. So we're here to continue the hearing on proposed code amendments for erosion prevention. And I'm joined here today by Lorena Janetsky. She's going to be able to speak to how we developed the code in more detail and some responses to comments that we've received to date. I offered to do the first part of this presentation. Moria Papagallo is our Stormwater Program Manager. We have a team of staff that has been integral to developing this code. Moria wasn't sure if she would be here today. The board may not know that I used to be the Stormwater Manager in my prior life with the county when I was at Waste Management, in addition to being the Waste Management Engineer. Moria is was our first full-time stormwater staff, and she manages a program of a few people now. And she's had a full plate since taking this job a little over 5 years ago, maybe. With our new permit, which we'll go into, there were some major requirements that we've had to get off the ground, which is why we're running behind on this one. We've been working on this code for about 2 years, I think. In retrospect, I wish we'd done a work session with the board to bring you along, because it is very complex. And we received a lot of comments from the board and from the public when we brought this at the last hearing. We've tried to address those in the memorandum you have, and we'll go into detail in the presentation on some of those issues as well. And we've received a number of comments also over the last couple days. We obviously haven't had the opportunity to address those and would like to have that opportunity, and we will intend to bring answers to those comments and questions at the next hearing if the board chooses to continue with the hearing. So there will be a number of options that we'll present at the end, but to kind of spoiler alert to get to those, the board could take this any direction. We could try to make minor adjustments from what you've received to date and get this to approval soon by the next hearing. More likely, you're going to want to have more time, and we're going to want to take feedback from the community to make more substantial changes and try to bring those back. You could also take this offline and go through a more robust stakeholder involvement process if that's what you would choose to do. There's pros and cons of that, and we'd need to answer what that would look like and who would need to be involved. So we'll get to those options more at the end, but just wanted to let you know that this public hearing process is how we go about getting input, both from you and the public. And so we're not set on this code at this date, and we can take it a number of directions, but we do have to make sure that we're meeting our state requirements that come down from federal requirements, actually, and something that passes muster with the Department of Environmental Quality. So without further ado, I'll get into it now. So for our presentation today, I'm going to go into more detail on why do we have to update our policy. I think we need to give you more context around that than we did at the last meeting. Lorena will go through the development process for the code and the responses to public comments and the board comments from last time. So again, these regulations come down through the Clean Water Act. The Clean Water Act authorized the EPA to regulate discharges to the nation's waters. And then it established authority to have the states administer the program. So here in Oregon, that's through the Department of Environmental Quality, through what's called the NPDES program, the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System. There's a lot of acronyms in stormwater. I'll try to talk through each of them. So this flows down from the Clean Water Act into these permits. So one is technically a permit, the NPDES. The other one is more of a program, the TMDL. And we'll go into more detail on those. The intent of the Clean Water Act and these regulations is to help the waters meet what's called beneficial uses. So beneficial uses include recreational contact, fish habitat. There's, we put the picture of the smoked salmon up there, so there's criteria around fish consumption. And so the criteria and drinking water, so there are water quality standards to be able to meet each of these beneficial uses related to mercury for the fish consumption, temperature for fish habitat, bacteria for recreational contact. So these programs are all designed to help the state meet water quality standards for all of the impaired water bodies, and we'll get into that. So again, this code is intended to meet two sets of program regulations. So the first one is that NPDES, National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, and it's the MS4 permit, and I'll go into more details, the MS4 Phase 2 permit. The second one is TMDL. The acronym there is Total Maximum Daily Load, and it's specific for the Willamette Basin, the Willamette watershed. So I was surprised when I started managing the stormwater program that the county didn't already have erosion prevention code, because the phase 1 of the NPDES permit applied to all municipalities over 100,000. So Eugene is one of those. They've had erosion prevention code for more than 20 years. We don't have anything substantial in our code, and we've known this has been coming for many years, but it didn't come to where we had to do something about it until we received our last permit, which was in 2019. Yep. So that put us on a 5-year track to have erosion control code adopted, and so that's why we're here today. So MS4, so that's the Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System. That's the system of pipes and ditches that collect water in our municipal area, so the Eugene, Springfield, urbanized area, that discharge into waters of the state. So that's that acronym, and moving on to that phase 2 part. So again, phase 1 was over 100,000. Phase 2 came into effect after that, and that's for urban areas with a minimum population of 50,000. So that encompasses, it's almost matched to our urban growth boundary area, but not quite, and that creates some of the complexity, and we'll get more into that. So this permit requires us to adopt what we call BMPs, or best management practices. So these are standard things to control erosion, like sediment fencing you'll see around construction sites and things like that. And when we talk about what is the minimum we need to do, that was part of the conversation last time. The permit requires us to regulate construction projects that cause an acre or more of ground disturbance. So looking at the map here gives you an idea of the complexity that we're dealing with. So this is the MS4 area in the green and yellow. The yellow are areas inside the urban growth boundary area. And we currently have intergovernmental agreements with the City of Eugene and the City of Springfield to cover the UGB areas that are in their part of the UGB. So in those areas, the City of Eugene implements their code. We've adopted that into our code, so the City of Eugene implements that code and their permitting systems. So people are already working through a permit system in those yellow areas. The green areas, do you have something to correct me on?
Something to interject. Okay. The MS4 Phase 2 permit requires us to do erosion prevention for a 1/4 acre or more. And it's the 1 acre or more that has to go to DEQ.
Thank you for clarifying. I'm not sure what I said there, but keep me on track.
Actually, can you
Okay.
restate that, please?
The MS4 permit requires us to have a program that addresses erosion prevention for disturbances that are a quarter acre or more in that MS4 area. For disturbances that are an acre or more, those permits also have to go to DEQ and get a DEQ permit.
I thought that's what I said, but thank you for
Sorry.
keeping me on track. For the quarter acre, yeah, the 1 acre disturbance covers beyond the MS4 area as well, correct? An acre or more of disturbance requires a permit from DEQ.
It's just within the MS4.
Oh, it's just within the- sorry.
Well, DEQ will require a permit through their process, but
Right.
for us, it's just within the MS4 that we would require the permit.
And a clarification, the map that we're showing there shows the MS4 area in green and yellow.
Yeah, so kind of getting back to the two colors. So the green are areas that are defined by the U.S. Census as urbanized areas. So we have to have urban level stormwater code in these areas. So when we talk about what is the minimum we need to do, it's that we need to have erosion prevention code for these green areas. We were supposed to have that in effect by last February, but we're behind schedule on that. We've been in communication with the DEQ. They understand where we're at, and we don't expect fines at this point. We will probably get a warning letter if we don't have this completed by the time we submit our next annual report, which is when?
That would be the end of November 1st.
November 1st. Okay. So we will continue to work on this, but we're not imminently facing any sort of repercussions from DEQ. And we knew we probably weren't going to hit that deadline. We've been pushing as hard as we could. So getting back to the minimum, it would be to address these green areas here. But there's a whole nother program, and so that's the TMDL program. So again, it's total maximum daily load. It's a science-based approach to help us meet standards for beneficial uses, as I discussed. The TMDL, so it's a numerical value of the loading that a surface water can receive and still meet water quality standards. So when we're talking about mercury, it's how much mercury could that water body receive on a daily basis to be able to still meet water quality standards. The Clean Water Act requires a TMDL for every impaired water body. So the state has a polluted waters list. It's called the 303D list. And so this map here shows all the impaired water bodies in Oregon. And you can see most of them are impaired for some parameter. It may be temperature, bacteria, mercury. And because it's so pervasive, this issue of not meeting water quality standards, the DEQ took a basin-wide approach to the whole Willamette Basin to try to address 3 parameters that would cover a wide variety of issues. So the mercury one addresses erosion. Okay. So the mercury TMDL is a surrogate for trying to address sedimentation into the river, which affects fish habitat and other parameters, arsenic coming into the water, other things like that. But it's focused on mercury, intending to meet other standards. So the TMDL, again, is a federal requirement administered through Oregon, and it's focusing on surface runoff because surface runoff contributes to about 75% of the total mercury load. Some people will say, there's atmospheric deposition of mercury. Yes, there is, but the majority comes from surface runoff, and so that's why we're focusing on that. A great reduction in mercury is needed to meet the water quality standards. So we're talking an 88% to 97% reduction based on different sub-basins within the Willamette. So a lot of action is needed, and so that's why we have gone beyond just the bare minimum threshold, is we're trying to assist in meeting the water quality standard and have something, again, that will pass muster with the DEQ of showing progress to help meet these goals. So this map shows the Willamette watershed overlaying Lane County, and you can see that it covers 3/4 of the county. So when we talk about why we went through an approach to have a unified code that covers the whole county, it's because 3/4 of the county is covered by the Willamette watershed, and then the Mid-Coast watershed covers most of the remainder of the county. There's just that small segment in the bottom there that's not covered. So the TMDL for the Mid-Coast is expected We don't know when that's going to come out. So let me back up. For the Willamette watershed, we need to have erosion code in place by the end of 2024. The Midcoast will be behind that. We don't know a date yet. There was a lawsuit by an environmental group that the DEQ wasn't moving fast enough on the TMDL, and they're under a court order to keep moving on the TMDL. So we expect that in the near future, but we don't have a specific date on that yet. Okay, so the TMDL requirements, what does that require? So unlike the NPDES permit, which is very prescriptive, that says the quarter of an acre threshold, the TMDL is not as prescriptive. Here is what is required of us. So we need to ensure that erosion, sediment, and waste management controls are used and maintained at construction sites from initial clearing through final stabilization. We need to incorporate these control measures into county building and grading permit applications, and it needs to be enforceable. So we have to meet these criteria, but it doesn't say acreage threshold. And so that's, again, why we were trying to go to a uniform code so that people, outside of that little green area didn't have one set of code, and inside the green areas and another set of code, for the benefit of having simplicity for staff and for the residents that we need to follow under a code. So the other piece, so the TMDL allows us to prioritize where erosion prevention requirements are applied. So we tried to focus on areas, sensitive areas such as like steep slopes, where erosion would be more problematic and more likely. So again, just trying to get to how we arrived at this code. So summarizing here, there are 5 different areas that require code. There's the Eugene UGB area, the Springfield UGB area 1 and 2. There's the green area, the census area for NPDES. Then there's the coming soon is the Willamette TMDL, and a little bit after that is the Midcoast TMDL. So the key considerations before I pass to Lorena: to develop code that meets the federal requirements, to provide consistency with other Lane County local agencies. So we looked at Eugene's code, we looked at Springfield's code, and tried to get as similar as we could. To scale permit requirements for the potential for erosion. So we didn't want to make everything onerous, but for situations where erosion would be more likely, we wanted to be more restrictive on monitoring the erosion potential there. Impacts to projects and the public, and then consideration of our staff resources. Stormwater is a very under-resourced program. We've talked about that several times. We don't have dedicated stormwater funding like the City of Eugene and the City of Springfield does. So we want to be cognizant of the need for staff to administer this program. And I will pass to Lorraine at this point.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good. Slide. Hello, everybody, and I'm going to be reading again today, so I don't miss any of my points. So I apologize for having my eyes down. So based on our legal review during the code writing process, we determined that the erosion prevention code was to be written as a technical code, not as a land use and planning code. Staff entered the code writing process with the goal of satisfying the county's federal MS4 and TMDL requirements, while also scaling the program requirements to the project's size, its location, and its potential to discharge pollutants and sediment into water bodies. The county environmental staff and permitting staff worked together with the county stormwater policy team to develop the proposed code. And this stormwater policy team was made up of a group composed of Public Works Division managers, the Public Works Director, and also division support staff. The code writing team also had support from county legal counsel and also from Ann Davies at LCOG, who has expertise in code writing. Staff began informing permit applicants of the upcoming erosion measures over a year ago with a soil disturbance sheet that we were handing out to customers and asking to be submitted with permit applications. And this was a way to kind of slow step people into the idea of taking a look at their site and figuring out what their disturbance area was. And now we've switched to some more official-looking handouts that talk about dates and when things are coming and how to plan for erosion prevention. And the next slide. As is common practice, when writing new code language, staff looked at other regional governments' codes. researching other jurisdictions, such as those listed here on the slide, who have already written their codes and have already passed DEQs is helpful for smaller jurisdictions like Lane County when we are just embarking on new code writing processes. Some of our code items were borrowed from other jurisdictions. For example, adopting and adapting the City of Eugene's code language and code structure to talk about outcomes, and we'll talk a little more about outcomes in a few minutes. And then other codes that we looked at were used as stepping stones for our final product. But our final product was strategically designed to address Lane County needs, such as the many miles of rivers and streams that we have, the small developments that we may have, small house properties along the rivers, lots of mountains and hills in the rivers in the counties, so lots of steeply sloped properties, and lots of sensitive areas with soils that may be prone to erosion. So sensitive areas are locations within the county that, due to topography and soils, are more susceptible to erosion. Sensitive areas can include highly erodible soils, and these soils are prevalent throughout the county. They're shown here in pink. And just an FYI, the reason that we don't have pink in the eastern edge is just because we're still working on getting that layer into our system. These are going to be maps then that are available for the community as they look at their property and decide how to design their erosion prevention program plan. Floodplains are another sensitive area, and they're shown in blue here. Over 4% of Lane County is located within the Federal Emergency Management Agency's mapped floodplain. And floodplains are sensitive because disturbed soils and construction debris can easily be carried away by floodwaters, and they can become hazards to downstream properties. Steep slopes facilitate erosion, and sandy soils, such as those along the coast, are very prone to both wind and rain erosion. Outcomes are proposed, our proposed code establishes these outcomes, and they are, have to be met by all land disturbances, whether an erosion permit is required or not, and whether a development permit is required or not. Outcomes are the positive results of using erosion prevention and construction site management practices during the construction process. And this outcome structure is what Eugene uses also for their code. There are 9 outcomes that we listed in our code, and each is a little bit different, focusing on different types of pollution and erosion that can happen most commonly on construction sites. Overall outcome goals are the protection of water features, rights-of-way, natural resources, and adjacent properties, protections from pollution, debris, sediment discharges, chemical runoff, things that are very common at construction sites. The final outcome that we do list in the code is that once construction is complete, the property needs to be stabilized, which is the picture down there in the right-hand corner. And construction, we realize that construction by its nature is disturbance of soil, and it can be messy. So outcomes are there to act as guideposts for how to reduce and control the disturbance that has to happen during that construction process. And the tools that people use to control that erosion, those are called best management practices. So BMPs for short. They are devices, so physical things, or they can just be practices that are used to achieve those positive outcomes during the construction project. So per the county's MS4 permit, we must adopt regulations that require the use of BMPs at construction sites. BMPs can be physical things like silt fences or just plastic sheeting over a pile of soil. Or they can be structural items within the landscape like rocked entrances where trucks will drive over before going out into the street, or ponds or swales. There are lots of different things that people can incorporate within their site to deal with the potential for erosion and pollution. And then BMPs can also be ground covers and plantings, like in the lower right-hand corner. It's those roots of those plants that stabilize the soil and keep the soil in place once that construction is complete. The erosion team determined that erosion requirements are warranted countywide, but a blanket one-size-fits-all approach did not fit diversity of landscapes and the different types of projects that we see. So as a result, staff built this tiered system. This is the decision tree that we have available for our customers. It's also available on paper and available online. And this tree is based upon, the decision tree offers this tiered permit system based upon the type of project, its size, its location. Larger and potentially more impactful projects will fall within the larger tiers of permits, and that's the tier 1 and 2 permits. And then smaller and less impactful will fall within the smaller tier 3 permit structure. And this slide shows it's a little small, so we're going to go to the next slide, and the same information, a little more readability on the PowerPoint here. At the top is our Tier 1, so that's for the largest erosion permits. And these are permits that are over an acre, or if they're smaller, they're part of a larger project that's over an acre. And Tier 1 permits also require a 1200C permit from DEQ. This dual permitting from Lane County and DEQ is a requirement of the MS4 Phase 2 permit. We've had a few questions about that from the public, so it is something that we have to do. The submittal for a Tier 1, though, is relatively easy. Customers go to the DEQ first, get their erosion plan approved through DEQ, and then it's just an easy submittal of that approved plan to us, along with a copy of their development site plan for our review. So we're not doing very much review on that. DEQ is doing the brunt of that. Development site plans are the site plans that are submitted with a building permit, a septic permit, or a planning permit, and those are standard requirements for all permits already. The Tier 2 permits are for less than an acre and are reviewed by county staff. So we've split the Tier 2 into 2 levels based upon size and the potential for impact to water features. The Tier 2 permits will also require an erosion and sediment control plan, just like the larger Tier 1s. Smaller Tier 3 permits are for soil disturbances that are within 50 feet of a water feature. The Tier 3 permits will receive quick reviews and approvals same day to just a few days after submittal, just based upon how we are structuring the intake process. Staff will also formulating an umbrella permit for organizations and contractors who can get, who may need multiple Tier 3s throughout a year, so that we can make that permitting process easier and more time, and take less time for them. A complete erosion and sediment control plan is not required for Tier 3 permits like it is for the Tier 1s and 2s. These permits just need to submit a copy of their development site plan. For all permits, except for the Tier 1 DEQ-approved permits, homeowners and contractors can draw up their own site and erosion plans, and they're not required to hire a design professional or somebody with a stamp to do that. Site plans, as I said before, are also a standard requirement for submittal for the building and septic and planning permits. So those should be pretty easy then to submit along with an erosion permit as well. So the goal of this tiered system is to have the level of the customer's permitting requirements reflect the intensity of the potential impacts of the project. Smaller projects will not be burdened with permitting requirements except where warranted by location.
I just wanted to point out, there was an omission in the code as written, and if the board wanted to move towards approval at the next hearing, we would need to read that in today.
There's a small omission with the
threshold,
The
sorry.
threshold, yes. One of the primary questions we've received from the public is how small of a project will require a permit. For projects that are not within 50 feet of a water feature or in a sensitive area, and sensitive areas are 15% slopes or greater, highly erodible soils or the floodplain, the minimum area of soil disturbance requiring a permit is a quarter acre.
I have a quick question. Where is a water feature defined?
We have a water feature defined in the definitions in our code.
So it's someplace in these hundreds of pages that I have in front of me. Okay.
Yes, it is. At a quarter acre is 10,890 square feet, and many development projects will be less or much less than a quarter acre of disturbance. The average home footprint is on the order of 2,000 square feet, and that's even including an attached garage. So many homes and smaller projects such as additions and sheds and accessory structures and many septic permits are not going to need an erosion prevention permit at all. It's only when smaller projects are within a sensitive area or within that 50-foot to a water feature that the need for a permit is warranted due to the potential of the project to increase pollutants to water features and natural resources. So in this slide, the larger house there on the left looks like a very pretty flat lot, and it most likely would not need an erosion permit. It's 2,000 square feet, but the smaller house, which is only maybe a 300 square foot footprint, right over a stream, that has a higher potential to cause damage to that stream, so that one would need a permit. Because of the county's dense pattern of river miles, the likelihood of pollution to our waters is high when soil is disturbed and not properly protected from erosion. The minor Tier 3 permit was created to help protect water features that are very near to water disturbance, to soil disturbance. Since even small disturbances like landscape maintenance activities can cause pollution and sedimentation. So landscape maintenance activities that disturb the soil within 50 feet of a water feature will be required to obtain that Tier 3 permit. Landscape activities that are not within the 50 foot of a water feature are accepted from requiring a permit, though they must still meet the outcomes. The Tier 3 permit's 50-foot setback trigger to a water feature is adopted from the Oregon DEQ 1200C permit application and its Appendix B, which requires a 50-foot minimum natural buffer zone or a professionally designed equivalent between soil disturbing activities and water features. The 50-foot setback area reduces the likelihood that disturbed soil and pollution will reach the water. And this photo does a good job of showing two different areas on the same lot. One, if they want to disturb very close to the water, it's easy to see how that has a much higher potential for affecting the river or stream. But back beyond that 50-foot mark out in the yard behind, much less chance of that just reaching the stream and disturbing it.
And Lorena, what was the threshold again that was emitted? That's
The
500
threshold is 500 square feet,
or 20 cubic yards?
20 cubic yards.
And so just for some perspective, an average dump truck is 10 cubic yards. So we're talking about, 2 full dump trucks of excavation to meet that threshold.
Staff also received comments about specific types of practices and whether or not they could trigger an erosion permit. So we wanted to address some of those because we did get a few comments and questions about that. The following types of projects, as long as they don't contain significant amounts of soil disturbance, such as regrading, are considered landscape maintenance. So fire-wise, limbing and grading, weeding, mastication of vegetation, home gardening, goat-targeted grazing. We received some questions about that.
And I beg your pardon, can you pull your microphone a little bit closer? We're
Oh,
having a little
sorry
bit of
about that. I'm so
sound
sorry.
distribution.
Okay. Prescriptive burns was another thing we received questions about. Trail maintenance and natural habitat restoration. And only when landscape maintenance disturbs the soil and is located within 50 feet of a water feature is when that need for the Tier 3 kicks in.
At those thresholds. So again, most of those would not require a permit.
Okay. Next slide. So Lane County is a large, geographically diverse county, and the erosion program addresses that diversity and its environmental challenges while also enforcing a balanced permitting system that takes into consideration development size and location and that development's potential for impacts to the environment. Because of these factors, the resulting erosion prevention code and permitting system will be complex, but complexity does not necessarily equate to vagueness or to inaccessibility. Staff are preparing multiple handouts and resources for customers, and we are available by phone, email, and in person to help people walk through their erosion permit plans. We are finalizing the composition of an erosion prevention manual that provides guidance for customers on how to assess their property and their project for erosion concerns. Staff are also creating sample erosion and sediment control plan drawings and other handouts that can assist customers. The proposed code contains language about emergency situations. That was a question that came up in our last meeting. The language allows for an emergency soil disturbance to occur prior to obtaining the permit, so as not to slow down that emergency response. Other codes, such as the state building and the on-site wastewater codes, also contain similar emergency language. An emergency septic repair is shown on the left here, and on the right, we have an emergency gas line repair. We would like to emphasize that the only instance in which either of these two would be needing a permit is if they were within 50 feet of a water feature, since they are very small disturbances on these properties. And in typical emergency situations, the chain of events is that a contractor will get hired and will proceed to the site to perform the work. And at the same time or soon thereafter, either they or one of their office staff calls us and lets us know what's going on. And then as soon as they can, they will submit a permit if one is needed. Questions have also come up about erosion prevention costs. The maximum cost estimate of up to 5% of the total construction cost was noted in our last public hearing, but most of erosion prevention costs will be less. BMPs may be purchased in stores or delivered to the site by the vendor, and some companies even offer installation services and design services as well, but those are not required by code. Most simple BMPs are pretty easy to install, and a certification is not required to get them in, so contractors can put them, and homeowners can put them in themselves. Common best management practice structural controls such as residential construction, like sediment fencings, like is shown here, and then the rocked entrance shown on the slide are what we would see the most. Supplies for a new single-family dwelling on a simple site that doesn't contain a lot of sensitive areas would require supplies ranging in price from about $500 to $1,000. And that could go up if the owner has the BMP supplier do that installation for them. It's important to note that many contractors now, they will buy in bulk so that they can reduce their costs even further because they know they'll have to use these products at many of their sites. As the complexity of the development site grows, the erosion prevention costs could also grow, but then so is the overall cost of the project, and we see that it usually keeps within a 2% to 5% range of the overall costs. It's of note that many erosion prevention measures are costs that already may be included within a project's budget, such as keeping vehicles in good working order or keeping chemicals from spilling on the ground.
I'll state this time check. We're about 40 minutes into this, and we'd estimated 30 and 30.
Okay.
We're wrapping up.
I have, yes, one more
I
slide.
think we can,
Yes.
so we've addressed the habitat
Yes.
concerns. Those are mostly exempt. There was the question by the board of what would happen if we didn't implement this code. Again, we're probably only looking at a warning letter at this point, as long as we keep making progress towards developing code. But if we dug in and said, no, we're not going to do it, we're looking at a Class 1 and a Class 2 violation for those two different permits at $8,000 or $4,000 a day as the base penalty, which can go up from there or less there based on other circumstances. So for our final slide, options here for you today. Again, this can go any direction you would like. This is proposed code. If you like what you have seen here today and want to move towards approval, we would just need to read in that missing threshold on the Tier 3. We did want to offer for number 2 here an option if the board wanted to move towards less restrictive measures, we could eliminate the Tier 3 permit requirement and we could raise the disturbance trigger to 1,000 square feet of land disturbance or 40 cubic yards. So we would want to know, what thresholds the board would like to see. Again, because the TMDL isn't prescriptive, we would just need to see if that would pass muster with a DEQ. We've set our thresholds based on what we've seen with other jurisdictions. The board could also move to another reading to give more time to address other concerns that we've received to date and your comments that you will offer today, or take no action, and we can come back with a completely different ordinance based on your direction. So however you'd like to see that move forward. So apologize for running over time, and that concludes our presentation, subject to your questions.
Well, you stated up front it's complex, Director Hurley. So, then we'll move down the hearing. At this point, we'll hear public testimony. Going to allow for 3 minutes per testimony. And please step to the microphone and provide, and state your name for the record and provide your testimony. If you have written testimony, please just drop it on the corner of the table right there. So at this point, we'll allow, let's make it 5 minutes. We have a limited number of testimonies, so let's give you a 5-minute limit on testimony. Please step to the mic, and I'll call you in order that you've signed up. First, we have I have legibility. Ronald Mann, followed by Gary Lee. Thank you. State your name for the record, and you will have 5 minutes when you. Yeah.
I'm going to need 1 moment to create a 5-minute timer. I hadn't realized you wanted a 5 minutes. 1 moment.
Thank you.
I didn't hear that.
She's just establishing the timer for 5 minutes. It's typically 3 minutes, and I've granted it up to
Just
5
wave at
minutes.
me when I get close.
There'll be a clock on the wall in a moment.
Yeah, keep an eye on the clock on the wall.
Which clock and which wall?
You'll see it in a moment.
All right. My name is Ronald Mann.
Hold on just 1 second. I'll give you a signal when we're ready to go. I have thrown a wrench into the works. So we normally allow 3 minutes, and that's what our standard set is. So we're reestablishing the clock for the 5 minutes that we're going to be granting. And it looks like we're ready to go, Mr. Mann. Please state your name for the record and proceed.
Ronald Mann. I'm from Florence, Oregon, and I've been a builder in that area for 46 years, and I'm a lifelong Oregonian. We have a family of builders. Goes back some time. I'd like to address this erosion control and look at it from a point of view of layers of bureaucracy that we have to mush our way through in Lane County. Currently, I haven't had a set of plans that I've submitted to Lane County that have come back in less than 5 months. That's currently. 2 of the sets of plans I've done in the last year and a half have required a lawyer to get involved before we could get them through, one on a fire and one on a rebuild on a ranch located in western Lane County. Now, I know that sounds like I'm getting off subject, but I would like you to consider the fact that this is another layer of bureaucracy, another layer. Because when I call up and I say, do I have to have an erosion control plan And they said, yes, maybe, I don't know, kind of, let me see. And then you're going to depend on them to tell you what it is. Does it meet that criteria? And probably what you're going to hear at the end of the day is you probably got to contact an expert, which means I'm going to be calling branch engineering or somebody like that to try and get them to put together an erosion control. They tell you the costs are 2%. Right now, I go ahead and do erosion control as a part and parcel to everything I do. That's part of the 1200C program. I have to make sure that the stuff on my site doesn't infiltrate water systems, doesn't go down drainage ways. If you institute this level, the level of bureaucracy is going to, I know, push us out because they're not going to want to take responsibility for telling you that it's okay, go ahead. They're going to say, hire an expert. We want somebody to sign us off on this because we don't want the responsibility. If you looked at the counties that they talked about, that they took their program from, every one of them is an urban setting. Blue River is not urban. Deadwood is not urban. Mapleton is not urban. But these are the places where people live that are cutting your timber, milking your cows, raising their children, serving in the gas stations that they work at daily, to make sure that when you do go to the coast, you do have somebody there to take care of you. When you do go up Blue River, there are people who can live there. Under this system, we have a housing crisis in the rural market just as bad as the urban market. This program, if instituted, has convinced me, after 46 years of working in Lane County, that I'm far better off to go 18 miles south and work in Douglas County, because the bureaucracy is not near as onerous as it is in Lane County. I've had people come to me. You've had them. I heard the other day, you had people come to you, and their hearts are breaking because they can't get a permit done. They can't get something through Lane County. Do you really believe if I've got a quarter of a mile of gravel road and I'm going to clear part of that, that at the end of the day, I'm not going to cut brush on more than 1,000 square feet? Seriously? You're going to have everybody in violation of the code at some level. And that's going to promote selective enforcement because you can't enforce it on everybody. So at the end of the day, when you define a water feature, that's a ditch. It's a mud puddle. If I put a rain drain on and I make a basin, that's a water feature. You're going to have some form. And if you say to me, well, no, Ron, you got it all wrong. I really didn't mean that. At the end of the day, if I can't figure it out, are what they say, are what they telling you clear and objective? If you read that and you can't figure it out, and you're all educated people, what about that guy that drives that school bus, who's afraid of the county oversight, afraid of the fines, afraid of being treated like that in there? Think about those people. They're your constituents. Those are the people, you are the only buffer they have between a bureaucracy that doesn't care and the law that is supposed to be neutral. You're the only hope they have, the only people who can stop this thing and separate urban from rural. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Mann. And Gary, and help me with the last name when you step forward, Gary, who'll be followed by Sid Lycan.
My name is Gary Rose. I own a small construction company down in Florence. I employ 10 to 15 employees, 10 steady. We pick up a few more whenever we can possibly find employees. This proposal has been totally neglected the public input side of this during the concept of the creation of this, and it shows radically. There was no contractors. There was nobody in here that actually could give guidance to what we're doing. I am adamantly opposed to this proposal as presented. When you have even the environmentalist coming to you and saying it's a good idea, but we'd like to be exempted, maybe it's not such a good idea. The cost will be staggering, not only for permit fees, but the cost of engineering, the time and delays for getting the permits, the engineering, the design and the construction. Many projects are on a very, very tight, limited budget. And even a small increase of cost can derail the project. This will be most devastating to your low cost and workforce housing, as so many of these are the most affected by increase in a budget. Sometimes it's dollars. I've had where an employee had to go to his boss and guarantee that they would give them so many hours of overtime per week to be able to qualify for a bank loan. So any added cost is going to kill the bottom end. The top end, most of them people are going to survive. There needs to be a new, let me get lined out here. This proposal needs to be removed from any further consideration, be sent back and started all over again. There needs to be a new team assigned, as the present team on this proposal has shown the total lack of acceptance and guidance from the Board of County Commissioners. They have brought almost exactly the same proposal as they had on your previous meeting. I see no changes. I laid everything down there as if I was going to go to work. I put page new, page old. They were exactly the same. There was no difference. After talking with the DEQ stormwater specialist and going over the permits, it is clear that DEQ requires a 1200C construction stormwater general permit for 1 acre and larger projects. The person I spoke to said the county can require less. However, the DEQ requirements is 1 acre, period. Their words was, it sounds like your planners went rogue. We do not require 500 square feet. When I said I had to have a erosion control project for a test pit, or a test pit on a failed septic system, they thought that was more than ridiculous. Something else I would like to add to the water feature. You asked for a definition of that. I would hope that you guys had already seen that. It's very, very deceiving on their part. The reason they used water feature instead of water body is defined in a 1200C permit as a tributary to the Willamette River. So therefore, they could no longer use that. So they used the water feature. And the inferior, I know I'm pronouncing this wrong, the inferior flow is a very short time. That's the definition. So you got a downspout coming off the corners of your house, those are water features. You got a koi pond in there, it's a water feature. I would say if you had a contained little pond there in a contained basket with a little waterfall coming down through it and recirculating that water, that would be a water feature. So in closing, I implore you guys to park this and get it started. Let's get back, let's get some public input. We'd be glad to help them and get this thing done and do it right, do it correctly this time. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Rose. And Sid Lyken is the last person signed up in Harris Hall, after which Ms. Jones will handle the online queue.
I need 5 minutes, so. Good afternoon, Chair Farr, members of the Board of Commissioners. My name is Sid Lyken. My office is in Eugene, but I'm here on behalf of the Western Oregon Builders Association as their executive officer. Our association represents residential home builders and associates in Lane, Lynn, Benton, and Lincoln counties. So we're a regional trade association. And I believe you have received a letter from our Director of Government Affairs, Betsy Schultz, which I believe you have, and that will be our written testimony. I just wanted to emphasize what is in that testimony, and also go back to a meeting that Betsy and I had with county staff on July 26th. And when we were talking about how we can partner, work together, because of the issues relating to housing throughout not only Lane County and our area, but throughout the state, is very significant. And we were working very, very closely with the governor's office and hopefully passing her bill, which did not happen at least this last session. But one of the things we talked about was really working together. And as we were in the meeting, Keir Miller did present a nice glossy-looking paper as part of the erosion policy and what you're working on. But I'm going to use county's words today because it almost as if it was no big deal. County's words today, this has been a 2-year complex issue. And the fact that we just heard about this July 26, I will say, is pretty disappointing. What we would like to continue to do is be your partner in this, work together and see what ideas and solutions we can find. If you go to an additional reading or if you want to do something different, I can assure you, Betsy or myself, some of our legal team will be there with you to work with you. We know this is mandated by the feds and the state. We understand that. That is not the issue here. What we want to do is hopefully provide a workable solution. And that'll be beneficial for all of our residential builders. A couple things I did listen to staff on, and of course, I really appreciated the fact it is a complex issue. I think we all understand that. The one thing I will correct, though, is that most of our independent small builders are not buying in bulk. They can't. From supply chain issues to now high interest rates, they're now really involved in just-in-time inventory management. That is how they're building homes right now, and so but they have no choice. They are not D.R. Horton. They're not Lennar. They're not any of these big major companies that have come into our area who can bring bulk and do buy in sufficient bulk to build their product very, very quickly. So hopefully as the board decides what's the next step, and if you go to another reading, or if you choose to maybe work on a different language, we're hopeful that you will also include our association to work with you so we can come up with some different what I would call some positive solutions. So on that, I want to thank you very much for your time. I know you have very hard work and ahead of you on this issue. I've spent 20 years doing this, so I totally understand what you're working through. So thank you for your time. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Mr. Lyken. That concludes the in Harris Hall testimony. Ms. Jones, can you handle the online queue, please?
Thank you, Chair Farr. I will do that. At this time, if you have signed up to give testimony for this ordinance, if you would raise your virtual hand, I will call you in the order that your hand is raised. Once I call on you, I will offer you the option to go on camera, and your testimony may begin. So if you would like to give public testimony for this item, please raise your hand now. Chair Farr, I do not see any hands being raised.
Thank you, Ms. Jones.
So I will meeting to you.
Okay, then I'll look around Harris Hall and see if anyone else in Harris Hall wishes to provide testimony on this public hearing. At this point in time, I see none. Ms. Jones, one more call for online testimony. Still none. Then.
Or one moment, Chair Farr. Again, if I'm opening up testimony for one more moment, if you would like to give testimony, please raise your virtual hand. Nope, we're good. Thanks, Chair Farr.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. Then at this point, we'll ask for a staff response to public testimony. But prior to that, I'll see if at this point, are there any questions or comments from the Board of Commissioners or staff? I'm seeing none. Then we'll ask for a staff response to public testimony.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate those comments from the public. We have worked to address those, and I feel that we have addressed those in some fashion previously. I would like to speak to maybe the water feature piece. You know, we're not trying to be deceitful. We're just trying to have a clear definition. Do you have any comments on that, Moria, of the water feature part? Of why we went to water feature rather than water body?
No, I don't have anything to add.
So I don't think we have anything else for you today, Chair Farr and the board. Again, we have two proposed motions for you in your script. You know, if you would like to make minor revisions and come back sooner, we have an October 17th recommended date. But if more comprehensive changes are needed, we would recommend pushing this out to November 28th. But we would like to hear guidance from the board on what things you would like to see us look at changing and what sort of public involvement process you would like to see beyond what we've done already.
Excellent. Then I'll look to the board and state that we do have three options as far as motions are concerned. One is to close the evidentiary hearing. The second is to continue the hearing October 17th, and the third is to continue the hearing on November 28th. Prior to that, discussion comments from the board. Vice Chair Trieger, followed by Commissioner Buck, unless you wish to switch. Commissioner Buck.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate the complexity of the issue. We have been hearing about this at the board, that it would be coming for some time now. And now that it's here, it's clearly fairly contentious. I personally want to let you know as staff that I know you're not here to deceive anybody. You're trying to do your job, and you're trying to follow the regulations that were given to you. So I want to give you the respect you deserve for all the hard work these last 2 years of trying to put together something that will pass both the national regulations and the state regulations through DEQ. In addition to that, I want to also add that I don't necessarily have a problem with taking some time and talking more with interested parties about the details. I don't necessarily think we need to throw away all that you've done, but if partners have an interest in providing alternatives to certain sections, I would like to hear that in detail, to ensure that every party that is going to be highly affected has a voice and has had an opportunity to provide input or maybe potential alternatives, given that there is maybe not a lot of leeway in the language, but there is some leeway in the language, with a balance between making sure we're following the rules, where we don't get into heavy penalty territory, but we're being responsive to the public. I would be very interested to hear what the rest of my colleagues think. It's good to hear that we're not going to be fined on November 1st, $8,000 a day. Like, I don't want to see that. But we know where we're kind of pushing the timeline. So I want to give us some time, but we have to have a deadline of some sort so that we don't run afoul of the DEQ or whatever national EPA regulations that you're trying to follow. It's important to me that we don't scratch it entirely and have to do 2 years' worth of work all over again. I think there's just really specific sections that are probably the areas we need to concentrate on. And we kind of have a little hint today of what those are. And maybe talk to the public, because, you know, some of the public comment that I've been getting via email recently is like, well, I can't take out all the blackberries in my backyard. And, you know, so I don't know that the public has a really great handle about what that means, specifically when it comes to, you know, the landscape activities. For the most part, folks aren't used to having to do any permitting to do landscaping on their property outside the UBG. They work their land like most agricultural folks do, or even if it's not a product or an agricultural product, they still want to do stuff on their property and don't necessarily know that they're running afoul of a brand-new regulation that came down from the federal government. And I am pretty sensitive to the environmental restoration. You know, upriver, we just had Mackenzie River Trust do a whole project on Finn Rock, and that is in the water, basically. So what that means to them, it sounds like it will likely just be an additional regulation or permitting fee for them to do their projects. But it's not any different than a house builder having an additional fee to do their project, you know, so they're both being hit in different ways, but basically the same way with the regulation. And I don't know how much input we've had or direct partnership and discussion we've had with environmental groups who are just now trying to sift through a lot of pages of regulation. So I'm hoping that my fellow commissioners have a similar sense, but I'll wait to hear. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Buck. Commissioner Lovell.
Thank you, Chair. Appreciate that. Appreciate the comments and the public testimony. Appreciate that 20-year man, Sid Lycan, coming back in Harris Hall. It's good to see you back in the hall, sir. There's a number of concerns I have about this. Obviously, the water feature thing has been addressed. I think the extra layer of bureaucracy that Mr. Rose had mentioned also is a concern of mine. I do like, however, Dan Hurley's Director Hurley's comments about possibly rethinking some of this. And with all that kind of churning in my head, obviously I've got half a page of questions I have, but I think I agree with Commissioner Buck that there needs to be some more input from the concerned parties. I think some contractors need to be on board with this before we proceed further. And I think that there's other interested parties that need their thumbprint on this as well, so we can do it right. My position is I want the bare absolute minimum to this. I don't want to add any more construction costs if need be. I want as much leeway as we can. And I also have a question about, is there any data that we have available, Mr. Hurley, to back up some of the approaches that we're having? I mean, because isn't construction doing enough of what they're doing now? Do we have any more data that says they're not doing enough? I mean, you mentioned that we had a bunch of mercury. That is our major concern, but is that coming from construction people per se, or is that coming from other entities that we don't have data to back up? That's one of my questions. I have another one.
Would you like me to respond to those?
I think that's a question directed to you, yes.
So specifically to your question around the data on mercury, I don't know. I would need to get back with you. I don't know if the DEQ has data on where that's coming from. I'm imagining, significant amounts coming from logging practices and agricultural practices. But I don't know if other staff is aware of more extensive study on that. I'm not aware of that.
I have their statements. I don't have it here with me, though, but I can find them. The DEQ did look and determined that for the mercury levels, a large percentage of it was coming from construction practices, from runoffs.
We could work on.
So that's construction practices. Does that include timber, as Mr. Hurley had mentioned? Because, we have riparian setbacks for timber, and I don't want to throw the timber industry under the bus. I think they're doing a really great job keeping their works out of the waterways.
Timber is not part of construction practices.
That's kind of what I thought. Second question I have then is this. Is Eugene Springfield, you said that we're, Mr. Hurley, I think you said that we're about 80 or 90% away from meeting our goals, that there was enough action that we had to require that was a lot. Is Eugene Springfield currently meeting their discharge goals?
So the goal is watershed wide, that 88 to 97% reduction. So I don't think that the city of Eugene and the city of Springfield have water quality monitoring for all of their outfalls to be able to say if they're meeting their thresholds or not. I could check with the city of Eugene. They have done quite a bit of monitoring along the Amazon Creek, but that's just one waterway, and I'm not sure that we have more data than that.
Yeah, I think that would be really helpful for this going forward. And as you know, the Amazon Creek now is inundated with people that are camping and homelessness, and there's all kinds of discharges going in there that are mucking up that water. So that's a whole different issue as well. So how do we know that the city's, Springfield and Eugene's results are adequate enough to model ours after? That's the other question I have. If we don't have their data.
Yes, Commissioner, we just know that those standards have been approved by DEQ. So we don't know that they are meeting the standards for water quality. We just know that they've been approved by DEQ. So we were trying to get to something that could be approved.
So is that a written piece of data that the DEQ, we could read? Because I remember last meeting, we were having a real tough issue identifying what exactly the DEQ was requiring from us. I remember somebody saying back in that meeting that the idea is for Lane County is to submit a proposal and to see if the DEQ agrees with it, which to me seems a little backwards.
So just going back to the presentation, though, so there's two programs that we're trying to meet approval on. So the NPDES has clear thresholds on that quarter acre disturbance. The TMDL piece extending beyond the urbanized area is less specific. So we really are proposing something and seeing how they respond. And so as we've developed this code, we've looked at other jurisdictions that have proposed something that's been approved. So we could propose something less than that and then see what happens. But it would just, be more time consuming if they reject it. We also, if we're not moving, I just wanted to throw out one more piece of concern. In addition to the penalties, we do expose ourselves to third-party lawsuits. Environmental groups could sue us for not meeting the intent of the TMDL and put us in a situation like the DEQ is with the Mid-Coast Basin.
Well, I understand your concern. I don't want to push forth any legislation or policy that's going to, have just our general contractors want to sue us. I want to get it right. So that's why I want to continue asking a few more questions if I have the time, Chair.
We are really quite time constrained, and I would guess that we're going to be moving this item down the road. There's going to be a lot of time for questions before we draw to the conclusion. So, Commissioner Lovell, so if you could conclude with maybe a single question.
Okay, well, my last concern is you said you have staff shortages. So Mr. Rose brought up a concern about, hey, if we're going to make a call to the permit office and trying to get some answers, if we have a call shortage, we're not going to be helping our people get this mandates and these policies in a timely fashion. That's my other concern. So I don't want to go back to the drawing board, but I share Commissioner Buck's response that we need to get this right, and I think we need some more information, and we need some more time. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Lovell. We'll move forward with the discussion. Commissioner Seneca?
Yeah,
I'll call on you last.
so the MS4 quarter acre or more is all we need to get through by November. Is that correct? And the TMDL can wait till 2024?
Correct. So that's a question. I would love to hear feedback from you all if
Right.
we want to take an incremental approach and have different areas of the county that have different code. We've tried to go to a universal across the county for simplicity for our residents and for us staffing the program. But if we wanted just to take an incremental approach and do that one, and then the Willamette Basin one, and then the Mid-Coast Basin one, we could do that. But given that it's, end of 2024, and it's taken us a long time to implement this code, we would want to start, down that path to address that second area that we need to address.
I mean, that's the direction I would like to go. I would like to just table the TMDL for now, and let's focus on the MS4, get one thing knocked out, then the next, and then the next, and just work down these. I think the staff put a lot of work into this, and it's just a little overwhelming for everybody to take on at once. I think we can all relate that our stakeholders feel a little left out, and that we have some great people here that would like to have input onto this TMDL, and that's just like Commissioner Buck says, we're not throwing this away, but we can pause it and then work on the MS4, which needs to be done now, and then work on it from there out.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. I have a couple of things. I have a long list of questions, but I'm as I recommended to Commissioner Lovell, there'll be time for more of my questions. I'm concerned that we've taken 2 years and essentially come up with nothing that's palatable. So what's happened over the 2 years? You'd mentioned that we were late on a requirement. We were several months late on that. I have a question as to why were we late on that? Why have things taken 2 years? And why, even after 2 years, the people who are the stakeholders feel that they've not been included in the process at all until this point? I have just very quickly, this is from Department of Fish and Wildlife. The department is concerned the current language may have unintended consequences. This is from ODFW. So clearly they weren't included in the discussion and the work, the 2 years' worth of work that brought us to this point. So I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done on this before it's going to be acceptable both to the third parties who may sue us and to the builders, landowners, et cetera, who may sue us. You know, we have to bring this together to a point where people will find it more palatable and at least feel that they have had input on the final document. So for instance, well, I'm not even going to go into the laundry list of questions that I have surrounding this. And I'm going to wait to see what Commissioner Vice Chair Trieger's motion is. But we've had an offer from the DEQ that says, Department of Fish and Wildlife, that says, thank you for the opportunity to provide comments and recommendations. We welcome the opportunity to work with the county. This is from ODFW. And from the the Western Home Builders Association, we welcome the offer to work, or the opportunity to work with the county. We have multiple agencies wanting to work together to make this a palatable, I'm using the term palatable, a usable document, that's something that's going to be able to get not just the confidence of this Board of County Commissioners, but the people that we serve. And the generations down the road who may look at the document that we produce today and find it vague enough that it can be just altered, or it can be interpreted in any fashion by whomever wants to interpret a certain way, or provide a lawsuit against the county because of a vague interpretation. So I am interested in moving this forward. I think that I'm not disinclined to scrap it and start from scratch, but I don't know if I would hold a majority on that particular opinion on this, Director Hurley. So at this point, I'll ask Vice Chair Trieger if you have a motion.
I don't have a motion. I just wanted to be in the queue to make a comment because I'm not sure a motion is what we need from what I'm hearing or what I would put forward. And this is partly a question for Director Hurley and perhaps for our administrator as far as process and best next steps. Because clearly there are folks who want to ask more questions, give input, provide perspective from the board to members of the public. And so I'm wondering if the best next step is either to make the motion to continue the hearing to November 28th, and whether that gives enough time to sift and sort through the input, provide feedback, clarify some terminology, or if more appropriately is to just look for board direction to put orders on pause while you figure out and then come back to us with a process that allows for more engagement and input from community stakeholders, board members that have long lists of questions can get them to you in a way that you have time to answer them and incorporate them, and how to dovetail that with what the DEQ is likely to come back to us with in terms of any fines or other punitive measures. It sounded like, if I heard you earlier, as long as we're showing good faith effort that we're moving in the right direction to be compliant, that they're less likely to take the most approach. But I'm also really hearing about the efficiency of consistency and simplicity for end users, and that's why I hesitate to do the sort of piecemeal approach. I'm not adamantly opposed, but it sounds like if you feel that there's an appropriate timeline that keeps us in the DEQ's good graces enough to do a more holistic approach and be responsive and get perspective and answer questions, that would be the direction I would like to see us give.
Thank you. Then I'll just add one very quick thing, and then I'm going to ask you for a recommendation. You give us 3 options, and Vice Chair Trieger is stating that maybe none of those options are exactly what we wish. So I'd like you to say what it is you think you've heard, and let's see if that is what we're actually trying to tell you. But one thing that you said, Ms. Janeski, is it was written as a technical code and not as, I think you said, a land use document. So written as a technical code, to me, that means it's people who don't understand technical code, people who would rather hear terms that mean something to them, trying to read a technical code, don't even know what you're talking about. So, so that being said, perhaps you have a description of what technical code means. Let's not worry about that right now, but I worry about the language being so vague that it can be interpreted so many different ways by individuals who wish to provide lawsuits or whatever it may be down the road. So, Dr. Hurley, what is your recommendation?
This is difficult.
This is kind of like the
may have other
DEQ, is that we're not going to tell you what we want, you tell us what you think we want.
For me, I am concerned with meeting the DEQ's requirements for under the NPDES permit, and that we're behind that already. And to speak to why we're behind, again, it goes back to our staffing levels. So because we don't have dedicated stormwater funds, we've had to carve out a piece of the road fund, dollars to be able to fund stormwater. But these regulations don't apply within the roadway, so we have to be very limited on the amount of funds we use for that, and also use funds coming from other divisions where we've kind of piecemealed a little bit of stormwater money together. Because of those limitations and the long list of things we've had to do for this permit, mapping all our water, our outfalls, putting in a new TMDL implementation plan, a whole stormwater, what's that stand for? Stormwater management plan. So we've had a lot of requirements to get done in 5 years. We just don't have the staffing to move that along in time, and so that's why we're at this point right now. I would say to return back with that later date, November 28th, and present an option for just limiting this code to the MS4 area, and to give us more time to engage with stakeholders on the TMDL piece. I'm concerned, looking back on what happened with the floodplain code we tried to do 15 years ago, we did a big stakeholder process, and it still erupted, and we didn't get code passed. And there was a lot of time and energy that went into that. So I don't want to see us go down that road. I want to get to something that keeps us in good standing with the DEQ and keeps moving the process along.
Well, thank you for that. Then that seems to fall within the parameters of the discussion we have. So what I've heard is that you'd like us to propose moving the hearing to November 28th. And on November 28th, some of the direction that you would receive is to come back with a proposal that includes an option for moving forward with the MS4 immediately, as we move a little bit more slowly with the broader document surrounding TMDL.
And Chair, I would also like to offer maybe a stakeholder engagement process when we come back that would address some of the concerns.
And the stakeholders would include people who've already offered, which would be the Western Builders and ODFW, for instance. Commissioner Buck, and then back to you, Vice Chair Trieger.
Question that, you said offer it on November 28th. I just want to make sure it happens before November 28th. Is that possible?
I think we could be sooner if we're keeping the same code and applying it to the MS4 area. If you want it to be the absolute minimum, that's the direction we would need to have it too. If you're not interested in exploring these areas for sensitive areas, the steep slopes, those higher requirements, which are in the City of Eugene and City of Springfield code, then that would be good direction for us to have before we return. If we're just coming back and changing the area, we can do that in the near term. But if we're making major changes, if we're just taking that piece out, that's fairly easy too. But if we're going a completely different direction, it'd be good to have more direction from you. Sorry, that probably didn't, was that clear?
It became far less clear after that.
Okay.
I think if I'm understanding, if we move to continue the hearing to November 28th and give direction to begin the process of convening stakeholders for feedback and input, then that gives you both things you need, and you come back to us November 28th with what you've been able to do so far and perhaps a little more of a formed plan for what still is to come.
That would give us sufficient time. I'm just saying we could be sooner than that. But it would take the 2 hearings to be able to get to an approval. We would have to present what we're proposing at that next hearing, and then give time for comment and return with the second hearing.
Now, we're down the 2 weeks prior to November 28th, so it would have to be almost a month prior to that.
We have either October 17th or November 28th.
So probably sticking with November 28th. We'll probably get a warning letter from DEQ, just for your awareness. But again, DEQ has indicated, as we're showing progress, that they'll continue to work with us.
Well, then I would move to continue the hearing to November 28th, 2023 at 1:30 time certain for consideration.
We have a motion to move the hearing to November
And
28th.
to allow them to,
And to direct staff to begin the process of developing a stakeholder engagement.
I would second that.
Okay, moved by Vice Chair Trigger and seconded by Commissioner Buck to continue the hearing to November 28th, 2023 at 1:30 PM, and to include the options for stakeholder involvement and the conclusion of the MS4 process.
Yes.
Okay, that sound like your motion, Vice Chair Trigger?
I didn't do the third part about the MS4. I didn't make that part of the original motion, but
I would be okay to include that.
yeah.
Okay. So as I stated, it is Vice Chair Trigger's motion, seconded by Commissioner Buck. Discussion to that motion. But Commissioner Lovell.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question. Obviously, you and I both had mentioned that we have many more questions to answer. Is there a forum where those are going to be discussed prior to voting on this measure, or are they subsequently at November meeting?
We could have an additional work session between now and then, if that would be helpful to hear additional comment from the board, or if you want, we can have individual meetings with you all to hear your feedback, or if you want to send email.
Then, thank you, Director Hurley, and Commissioner Lovell. I prefer the individual meetings, perhaps, as opposed to a general work session, which general work sessions tend to get tangential in their approach. So that way, commissioners could have very specific conversations regarding very specific questions that each may have. Okay. Does that cover you all right, Commissioner Lovell?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it does.
Very good. Then further discussion to the motion, Commissioner Senega.
Yes, sorry, I got a little confused. So that doesn't, your motion doesn't include separating the MS4?
It did.
Or it does?
It didn't initially, but it does as
It does now. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Very good. So further discussion? Then, without further discussion, actually, Director Hurley, anything that you'd like to add before we have this vote?
Nothing, Chair. Thank you.
Very good. Then I will call for the vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Passes unanimously, including Commissioner Lovell, who is a little bit on sound delay. Thank you very much for the presentation today. Thanks for the work that's gone to it this far. And let's come up with something that's going to work for the folks who have offered input and their teamwork in moving us forward. Thank you, Director Hurley. Thank you very much.
Chair Farr?
Yes. Yes,
I
Ms.
could
Jones.
also, just because we have two orders that are tied together, if I could get a motion similar on order 23-9-1908 to roll it until the 28th, that would be helpful.
Thank you. So, Vice Chair Trigger,
yeah.
looking at order 2309-1908.
So to that order, I move that we schedule a fourth reading and hearing on November 28th, 2023, 1:30 PM time certain.
Second.
Moved by Vice Chair Trigger and seconded by Commissioner Buck, order 2309-1908 with a November 28 date attached to it. Discussion to that motion? Staff comments, input? I see none. Then I'll call for the vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Passes unanimously. Thank you very much. I'm sorry, we don't have time for you.
Yeah, don't tempt them.
All right. This is going to
Light
be,
afternoon you've scheduled here.
then we're on page 4, aren't we?
Yep, item 12.
So moving forward with item 12A, which is order 2309-1909 in the matter of adoption of the 2023 Community Needs Assessment. And Mr. Mokrahysky, after you introduce your panel, I have a quick word.
Well, I'll turn it over to Eve Gray, our Director of Health and Human Services, and just note for the board that in going forward, we'll strike the interim in Human Services Division Manager and welcome Kate Budd to her second day as Lane County's Human Services. Is that right? Second day?
It is, yes.
Yesterday was officially your first day in this new role, so congratulations, and we're excited to have you there. And we have Brianna Rogers, our Program Services Coordinator, here as well.
You beat me to the draw. I don't need it.
Okay, sorry, I stole your thunder.
Ms. Budd, congratulations. We look forward to you stepping into the role that you've been serving in basically for the last approximately 4 months, I believe. Very admirably so.
Thank you.
Thank you. Director Gray, to you.
I think all my work is done. I'll just turn it over to the team. Well, I have the pleasure of introducing Brianna Rogers, who's a program service coordinator with the Housing and Community Action Team. And Brianna has been with the county for almost a year and a half at this point, but stepped in with not a great deal of familiarity around community action and has learned just an enormous amount of information and spearheaded this community needs assessment for the first time and has done an exemplary job. So just really appreciate her leadership on this effort and the collaborative way in which she was able to bring this document together, and really looking forward to being able to utilizing it in many different planning ways.
I understand she's now actually teaching college courses on this.
I am, you picked that up.
Thank you.
I'll introduce myself again. My name is Brianna Rogers. I'm a Program Services Coordinator with Lane County Housing and Community Action. Here today to present the 2023 Community Needs Assessment, and at the end of the presentation, ask that you consider adopting this assessment. So what is community action? Community action at its core supports individuals and families living in poverty. And it does so in a variety of ways, some being listed, providing basic need, food, clothing, hygiene items, access to longer-term housing, employment and education services, and connections to stabilization programs. Lane County is designated a community action agency because we receive community service block grant funding from the Oregon Housing and Community Services. That's our state funder. And it's designated to provide supports and tools to enable households, individuals, and families to lift themselves out of poverty. As you are well aware, Lane County receives OHCS funding and federal funding for many programs across the board. So that would be things like anti-poverty programs, homelessness prevention, shelter, permanent supportive, transitional, and rapid rehousing programs, and many, many more that make up the scope of services available to low-income and unhoused individuals and families. An overview of the community needs assessment in general. It assesses the gaps and needs and services in the community, and also it looks at areas for improvement as well. So it begins with a survey, and it casts a wide net for survey respondents, and encompasses voices from many, many different groups of folks, again listed, low-income individuals, service providers, healthcare providers, elected officials, education providers, and those in the private and public sector as well. There are many more, but that's a snapshot of who we survey. And it informs our strategic plan. And so that strategic plan prioritizes funding and programs for the next 3 years. So this is done every 3 years as a requirement from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. And locally, OHCS, Oregon Housing and Community Services, is our local oversight who provides us funding and makes sure that we're doing all the things that we need to do in monitoring. A little bit about the process. We created a ad hoc committee from the Poverty and Homelessness Board. And just a shout out and a thank you to those folks who were a part of that process. So Pat Farr, Catherine Ryan, Debbie Farr, Rosie Marquez, and Matthias Smith provided support on the survey creation and then the assessment itself and providing feedback on the process. And then a thank you to our full Poverty and Homelessness Board as well. They also were able to see in the final stages the assessment and provide feedback and ask questions and just make sure it really encompassed the community need. The Housing and Community Action Team was consulted for feedback on the process throughout, and we worked with internal and external partners too. So that would be, for example, I worked with Lane County Dovetail and HIV Alliance and Lane Workforce Partnership to make sure that I had all the information about their programs, data, and made sure that it really encompassed what they were doing, and all of that information was appropriately encompassed in the community needs assessment. This was the first community assessment completed with new leadership, and I note that because it was a completely new process for the leadership staff, for the staff, for myself, and many things have changed since 2019 when the last needs assessment was done.
And we made some strategic adjustments to how questions were asked within the survey. I'm going to go into that a little bit in a few slides. But we wanted to get the most amount of detail and information, and we think that the way that we asked those questions really helped with that process. And then lessons learned. We can't do a process without learning any lessons. So a couple lessons learned. We did hear voices from the low-income community members, but there can always be more done to encourage comments and feedback and surveys and really let them know what this is for and make sure that they understand why their voices are being asked for and let them know that they do have a voice in what's happening in their community. And the other lesson learned, we engage culturally specific providers in creating the survey and the assessment, but it's an active process. We're always learning more about equity and inclusion, and I think that that's something that is a continued process for the county as well. Without further ado, the top 4 needs identified in the community's needs assessment for 2023 in order are access to mental health providers, affordable housing in rural areas, and basic needs support service centers. You'll notice 4 instead of 3 or 5. That's because 4 is the requirement by Oregon Housing and Community Services and the Community Action. A couple differences between the 2019 and the 2023 needs assessment. So for 2019, the top 4 needs were stable housing, emergency shelter, everyday basic needs, and domestic violence services. In addition, and then the 2023 needs are listed below. In addition to the top 4 needs, we asked for the top 3 needs in 8 different service areas. So you may be looking at this and saying, well, I really think that emergency shelter is still a need, and I really think domestic violence services are still a need. That is very true, and we hope that by asking the top 3 needs within 8 service areas, we are able to gather more information. That is one of the strategic kind of changes we made to the survey itself, was how we ask questions to get the most amount of information. So now we have a top 4 and a top 3 in different areas. And then we also asked for the largest barrier within each of the 8 service areas, and across the board in most of the 8 service areas, the largest barrier seen was case management and knowing how to access and where to access services. We performed a chi-squared statistical analysis, and I need to pause and thank Tamara Miller with the Lane County Human Services Data and Analytics team. She did the chi-squared statistical analysis and the visuals throughout the community needs assessment, and that work is really important in understanding the data and being able to represent it in a visual way that's really easy to understand. So there's a couple ways to read this statistical analysis, and the larger one, we've called it the cool graph, because it's very cool to see all this data laid out in this way, is later within the community needs assessment. But there are a couple ways to look at the data. One way is across by service area. And you'll see within this example, within crisis housing, low barrier shelters was identified as a top need. And this shows us that those with a disability, those who are non-Latino, or those who are gender non-binary need low barrier shelters more than other demographics. And that those with seniors in the household over 65 need low barrier shelters less than other demographics. So this is one way to read the information across by service area. The other way is to look at the data down by demographic type. So as an example, we pulled out if there are children in the household who are under 18 years of age, they are more likely, that household is more likely to need affordable housing, move-in costs, family shelters, safe, affordable childcare, before and after school programs, and childcare for employment. And those households with children in the household under 18 are less likely to need legal sleep sites and college trade apprenticeship programs. It's a lot of data, but it is very cool when you really dig into it. This is a sunburst visualization of the data as well. So I noted before, emergency shelter was noted in the 2019 needs assessment as a top need. It's not on the 2023 top 4, but within crisis housing, you'll see here that low barrier shelters, family shelters, and legal sleep sites are the top 3 needs within crisis housing. All 8 of the service areas are here with each of their top 3, and I'll just pause for a moment. Here's what I found. Oh. Listening to me? Next steps, so on Thursday, September 14th, last Thursday, September 14th, this information was presented to the Poverty and Homelessness Board, who approved the community needs assessment for 2023. And today, our ask on September 19th is that this board consider adopting the 2023 community needs assessment. It will help fulfill our requirement for our organizational standards, which are due at the end of the month. And that's part of what OHCS and the U.S. Department of Human Services looks at as far as our auditing and compliance as our organizational standards. Questions, and I can go back to any of the slides in case there are specific slides as well.
Thank you. Then I'll open it up to the board for questions. Vice Chair Trieger.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation. In the interest of time, I just have one clarifying question about the data on the early slide with the 4 graphics that show the top 4, that the affordable housing and then affordable housing in rural areas. So is the 74.9 who indicated affordable housing inclusive of rural area housing needs, and the rural area is of that, or is that essentially metro area 74.9, rural area 61.7?
I wouldn't say it's necessarily metro versus, or urban versus rural. They are 2 separately, though. So within, I'll show the Sunburst as the example. With the 8 service areas that we asked about, permanent affordable housing on the middle right was one, and affordable housing was designated one of the top 3. And then in the bottom left, rural areas. So rural areas was a specific service type that we asked about, and they designated that affordable housing was also a top need.
Of the needs
so
in
now we
rural
have
areas. Got it.
affordable housing in general and affordable housing in rural areas.
Got it. Thank you. That's all I have, Chair. I'm prepared to move the order if there are no other questions.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Any further questions? I'm seeing none, but I'll just bring up one that Mayor Vinnis asked. And Mayor Vinnis specifically said, well, why isn't capacity noted as an immediate need? And you provided a pretty good answer during that meeting. And really, we all know that capacity is an issue in virtually everything that we do. But can you kind of conclude why capacity is not called out?
Yes, I hope I remember what I said. Capacity is slightly called out here, but it is, I believe, called out throughout the full needs assessment. It is called out in the barriers. Folks are having a hard time. The largest barrier that I noted was case management, understanding where to go and how to access services. That is a capacity issue as well. And then throughout the needs assessment, it's noted in many, many sections that the need far outweighs the services that we have, and the need far outweighs the number of folks who are able to access services. The capacity is very low with where we are at right now. So it may not be a need right here, but throughout the assessment, you'll see that capacity is addressed.
That is precisely how you addressed Mayor Vinnis's question, which was kind of echoed throughout the rest of the Poverty and Homelessness Board, but that's spot on. Thank you.
As I understand it, soon there might be an app for that, right?
In some ways, yes.
Yeah, that's great. I'm excited about that, too. So I will move to approve Order 23-09-19-09 in the matter of adoption of the 2023 Community Needs Assessment.
Second.
Moved by Vice Chair Trieger and seconded by Commissioner Buck, Order 2309-1909. Discussion to the motion? Commissioner Buck.
Just a quick statement. A lot of what you showed us in this report is common sense. You know, if you have children, you have these particular sets of needs that can be retained pretty easily by the public. But it's also really interesting to see the shift over the last 4 years from the last plan and the needs then and how they've morphed, but not that far. You know, not that far, but the way that we articulate it in the community changed slightly. So, I know we'll do this again, and, it will be interesting to see the trajectory of how the community discusses or communicates some of the similar needs that we've had in the past, but how people function every day today. So I just wanted to make that statement. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Buck. Any further questions or comments before I call for the vote? I do have a quick question. On the cover of the Community Needs Assessment is a picture of a bridge. Does anybody know the name of that bridge?
I really should have known
Is-
that before I put it on the page.
It's one of Connie McCullough's, one of the 5 greatest bridges in Oregon along the coast. This is called the Cape Creek Bridge, which at the time it was built in the early 1930s was called the $1 Million Mile because they had to build a tunnel just to get to the bridge. So that's a little bit of Lane County history. So with that, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Passes unanimously. Thank you, Commissioner Laval. Thank you very much, Brianna. Excellent presentation. Then we'll move along to a discussion on the status on progress with unhoused population initiatives. And Kate Budd.
Great, thank you, Chair and Commissioners. Nice to see all of you. So today I have 3 topics to share. The first being to receive oversight of the outcomes that the programs within the Housing Community Action Team achieved during the last fiscal year. All of the contracts that we have program plans which include specific outputs and outcomes that the programs are to work toward, and they enter data into the Homeless Management Information System from which we're able to pull out those outputs and outcomes. And so in total, the Housing Community Action Team contracts with 25 different agencies to provide 74 different programs during the last fiscal year. That's a significant increase from before COVID. And as a result of COVID and additional investments made particularly at the state and federal levels, we saw the number of programs skyrocket in the last few years. And now going into this next fiscal year, we're actually seeing a decrease in the number of programs. We funded 10 different types of programs that encompass services for people who are houseless, people who are at risk of losing their home, and then people who are just simply in poverty, as Brianna mentioned, through community action. The majority of the outcomes and outputs that each of the programs work toward are dictated through U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, through their system performance measurements, as well as through the community action data reporting requirements, which are called the National Performance Indicators. I will share that across those programs, we work with 30 different funding sources. The vast majority of those funding sources have very strict guidelines that dictate what types of programs can be funded through them, as well as include pretty detailed guidelines as to what is allowable and what the focus of those programs need to be. So the first type of program that I'm going to share is prevention assistance, which is helping people who are housed but at risk of losing their home by having rent arrearages or maybe utility arrearages. And so in total, all 11 of the programs through 10 different agencies in the community served 906 households, which was over the total outcome that these programs were working toward. And so we were pleased to be able to see that those outcomes were achieved. As I'm walking through these different program types, if someone is interested in the breakdown of this goal based on program, there is an addendum to this PowerPoint slide deck, and you can see that breakdown even further. I really wanted to add these next two slides simply to celebrate the incredible work of our rent and energy assistance team with Human Services Division. This team took on the enormous amount of COVID rent and utility assistance that arrived pretty early on in COVID. And if we look at the full period of time, so basically from April of 2020 to June 30 of 2023, when the bulk of the COVID rent assistance dollars were spent, they distributed over $52 million to nearly 10,000 households during that less than I guess it was a little bit more than 3 years. But that's incredible. They expanded capacity very quickly. They created partnerships with local agencies, and in concert with those partners, they achieved an enormous amount of support for community members in Lane County. So just want to share that exciting statistic because as you can imagine, without this type of assistance, many of these households would be experiencing houselessness or at least had lost their housing and moved to unstable housing conditions. Also, there was additional COVID energy rent assistance, and these dollars helped with heating and cooling expenses, with costs related to weatherization for homes, and then dollars to help pay down water bills. And so on top of the rent assistance, this team, in partnership with 8 local agencies, most of which were the same providing rent assistance, they provided just in the last fiscal year over $8 million of assistance to nearly 9,000 households. And so utility assistance was integral in the support that was provided, particularly from both the federal and the state levels, to help stabilize households moving forward. And just again, a huge kudos to this team and the local partners that helped make this incredible outcome achieved. So then we move into community action work, which is focused on helping people who are in poverty. And we have 11 community service and access center programs across 7 different agencies. And these programs include population-specific work, such as for youth, for the Latinx community, and then we have a service center specifically for Southern Lane County down in Cottage Grove, another in Florence, and then another in Springfield. And so collectively, this group of programs achieved 91% of their overall goal. And when we checked in with the agencies, the vast majority of them shared that the households that are looking to access supports are looking for more and more supports than they had prior to COVID. And so their capacity to serve, a greater amount of households is limited because they want to make sure that the needs of the households that are already engaged are being served. Food security, we work with 3 agencies to provide 4 programs, which include Meals on Wheels, the dining room here in Eugene. We contract with Upper Willamette CDC, which is based out of Oak Ridge, and they provided similar feedback as the access centers. They didn't quite meet the number of households that we had anticipated, and it was really because the households that were coming to them had higher needs and needed more regular food support, and so they weren't able to welcome as many households as they had originally anticipated. The meals program did, however, serve all of the households that they anticipated. So these are two family-centric programs. The Relief Nursery provides childcare for families that may be in crisis and need a place to drop their kiddos off for a period of time. Pearl Buck Center provides preschool and parenting support to families in the community. They were just too short of serving the total number of households and actually had similar feedback as the other food and community action agencies, saying that they've seen their families are in greater need, particularly as a result of just coming out of COVID and trying to get back to their new normal. So we're moving to the programs that serve people who are houseless, and this is focused on street outreach. The 5 outreach programs across 4 agencies did meet their target goals, and very much attributed to their willingness to be mobile, to get out into the community, and to really focus on meeting their clients where they are. And continually work to reduce the barriers that they have to housing as well as to emergency shelter. We also funded in the last fiscal year housing navigators through 3 different agencies to work in alternative shelters that are funded by the City of Eugene. And these programs all met their goals and worked intensively within those alternative shelters to help people decrease their housing barriers and move on to permanent housing. Diversion is a program that focuses on people who are newer to houselessness and have resources to be able to move out of houselessness and continue to pay rent, whether it's in a traditional rental or it might be in some type of a shared housing situation. And so diversion focuses on just having creative housing conversations, utilizing motivational interviewing techniques, and then paying kind of barrier busting costs, often related to move-in costs or related to transportation costs, so that people are able to get into stable housing and remain there. This program also met their overall goals and has been very successful, being that fiscal year was the first year that it began. Regarding emergency shelter, we saw the number of shelters supported grow during COVID. The need also continued to grow. And we saw that the shelters were close to meeting their overall household goals. They reported that folks are staying longer than they may have originally intended. One of the primary reasons is just the challenge of being able to find housing that's affordable for their shelter residents to transition into, which means that they're staying in the shelters longer. We had a nightly shelter average utilization rate of 82%. One of the kind of differences between shelters for single adults or couples and youth is that the youth shelters tend to regularly be underutilized, so that they are available when a youth is in crisis, or there may be some type of CPS challenge where a youth needs to be dropped off to the shelter. And so in digging a bit further, the adult shelters had a higher utilization rate than the youth shelters, for example. We also, as an emergency shelter system, have opportunities for improvement around the rate at which residents are exiting to permanent housing. There are many challenges related to doing doing that, but we are working this fiscal year with our emergency shelter providers to really focus on that particular outcome and helping to reduce the barriers that residents have to transitioning into permanent housing. And All In is helping with that effort as well with those additional dollars and programs. We were fortunate in the last fiscal year to receive Youth Homelessness Demonstration Program dollars. This is a significant grant, over nearly $2 million that we received through HUD to support youth programs. And so the programs began in the last fiscal year. Many of them were run by agencies who are new to serving youth, and they were new programs. And so they did have a slow start. They're still working on ramping up to work toward those outcomes. But fortunately, these dollars are very much centered around providing technical assistance and support through HUD contractors to bring the programs up to par within the communities. And we have seen a significant uptick in the progress toward outcomes as this new fiscal year has started. Rapid rehousing is an effort to move people who are unsheltered and sheltered into permanent housing. And so this program type did meet their overall target goal in moving people to permanent destinations, which is very positive, but do have room for improvement when it comes to helping households increase their income. And so, for example, part of the work that's done is helping people move forward in their careers. And so engaging individuals with workforce and WorkSource programs so that when the rent increases again, they're on a trajectory to be able to earn more in their work. And so that's something we're focusing on in this next fiscal year. And then permanent supported housing. This effort, I often like to remind folks, is done in a number of different ways. Firstly, through vouchers that are offered through Homes for Good in collaboration with the Oregon Department of Veterans Affairs that are offered to veterans with high needs. Also provided through scattered site permanent supported housing, which is working with private landlords across Lane County and placing people in different units, and then also through site-based permanent supported housing. And the Nell is an example of a site-based facility where a number of people are residing together and receiving supportive housing. This program, they met their target around helping households maintain permanent housing. This is the goal of permanent supported housing, is to help people be stable and increase their overall quality of life. There is still room for those programs to work with the households to increase their income, both through earned income through jobs, but also through making sure that they're receiving the maximum amount of public assistance that they might be eligible for, Social Security, for example, helping people apply. And then also we have an outcome related to the length of time someone waits to get into a unit. Ultimately, it's ideal that it's as short as possible. And due to the extreme paperwork and just the challenges of engaging with folks who have very high needs, it does take a long time. Last fiscal year, 110 days to identify that someone has a unit and to help move them in. But it is much less than the year before. And so we're going in the right direction, but still have a lot of room for improvement. So overall, with our program contracts, we continue to take a collaborative approach with our incredible grantees, working with them to provide technical assistance, working to provide additional trainings related to the programs that they're offering. We're actively sharing these outcome output reports with the agencies on a quarterly basis and having conversations with them about, what are the challenges to achieving these outcomes, problems? What concerns do you have? What additional information might be helpful? And then how can we help you? We are in partnership with the H&HS administration doing regular both program and fiscal monitorings, which agencies have indicated are helpful in making sure that they're in alignment with county expectations. And then also planning on doing a more robust request for proposal for many of the programs that we walked through, so that agencies have a chance to what I refer to as right-size their programs. Right now, agencies are working from proposals that were provided in 2019 in some cases. And so as you can imagine, the costs of running those programs then don't match what it costs to run those programs now, as well as the outcomes, may need to change. And so this, we hope, will give the agencies an opportunity to really think through, what is it that they'd like to do? What are the outcomes related to those programs? And then what are the dollars they need to actually achieve those dollars? So we continue to be in conversations with our amazing contracts team. And so I do have two other areas of focus. I'm happy to continue or to pause for questions.
There is kind of a natural platform right here, or natural pause point right there. So I'll look to the board to see if they have any questions on the presentation so far before we get into all in and the others. Commissioner Buck, this is a lot of stuff you've given us, but Commissioner Buck.
Thank you, Chair. On one slide, back up a ways, you don't have to go there. You put down that exits to permanent housing was roughly 24%. And I know part of our goal is to get that to 100%, right? And there are certainly structural barriers to having the actual capacity to move people from shelter to, some kind of more temporary or permanent setting. How can we assist as a board in helping to leap that percentage up, knowing that we try to invest as much as we can and with the resources we have in funding programs for housing programs that can fulfill that need. But I feel like that's a big gap. 24% is not a nice success rate that I would like to see. And I'm sure that you would like to see more. And so I'm asking basically how we as a board can help you fulfill that desire to get them into into a higher bracket of success into permanent housing.
So I think firstly, just supporting opportunities for additional housing within the county. And there's many different ways to do that, of course, but that is one of the greatest challenges. And, I would say even just additional housing, even if it isn't affordable, while that's a priority, just additional housing helps to provide a little bit of wiggle room. The other thing that I would offer is that through the all-in efforts, we are starting a landlord risk mitigation program that will build upon a newer state program and help to recoup costs for landlords up to $15,000. And so if you happen to know any landlords or property management companies that might be interested in having further conversations with program providers, learning more about this mitigation program, we'd be very interested in having conversations and certainly recognize that we want to do what we can to help mitigate their risk, and that we do find that our providers are very responsive in being able to do that.
So I knew this would be a semi-softball question. However, it's important that the public hears that because that is more than just what the board itself can do. That is really where the public comes into play and can say, oh, okay, in order to have a higher success rate in getting folks into permanent housing, I could do that. Like, I could talk to my friend I know as a landlord and see if they're interested in participating in this program. And I think the more that we get the community itself kind of involved in the solutions and working to help us fulfill the desire of making sure that people are housed. They need to hear more of that. So if there are other suggestions as well, I'd love to be able to find more and more ways to get that information out into the public so individuals have some kind of ownership over a community-wide solution that alone, singly as the board, we probably don't have all the power and all the finances to do it. But collectively, as a community, we need to come together to find those solutions. But those are suggestions that we just need to make public as much as possible. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Commissioner Buck, and I'll get you in 1 second, but, Vice Chair Trujillo, excuse me. Your answer was immediately more housing. And that's always been your answer, and that's just about everybody's answer is, what can we do? More housing, more front doors is what I would call it, more places for people to sleep safely tonight. Vice Chair Trigger? Director.
Just add to that, encouraging the public to be creative. It doesn't always have to be a front door. It could be a spare room. It could be something else. We have about almost 5,000 people in this community who are experiencing houselessness at any given time. And some of those folks you might not welcome into your room, but many of them you probably would. It's the majority of folks experiencing houselessness are regular people who have fallen on hard times and who just need a little help to get back on their feet. So definitely encourage folks to think about that as well.
And we could magnify that as we move forward, because that really is an opportunity, because bringing in a lodger, so to speak, can really benefit both the house and the lodger and the household and the children in the household, and depending on the mix. Pardon me, Vice Chair Trigger.
Thank you. No, thank you, Chair. And thank you, Director Gray, because that was one of the 2 points I was going to say, which is we think housing, and what we mean is safe, stable places for people to live, which isn't always new housing or more housing. So we've heard about home share and other programs like that. So yes to that, and appreciate you lifting up that, the headlines of who is unhoused doesn't actually proportionally match the overarching reality and demographic of who is unhoused, which is people who are employed, people who haven't been unhoused for very long, people who don't have other issues. So thank you for that. The other piece, though, when we talk about more housing, of course, we all, if we're in Eugene, see more housing going up in the form of student housing. And I'm wondering what, if any, conversations we're having with the university and what we understand about their lease-up or vacancy, depending how you want to frame it, rates in all their many, 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 many new units that they are building, and whether we're seeing students move from projects they've built in the past into the newer ones, creating more vacancy. Just anything that we're doing to intersect with those units that are going up in our community at a really rapid rate.
Yeah, I appreciate your point. I can't say we're having conversations on that particular topic. I think, honestly, the University of Oregon is also struggling to meet the needs of their students who are houseless. And so that's where our conversations are at this point. But very happy to check in regarding vacancy rates and any conversations we can have about placing students in the new student housing that is being created and what exists today.
Yeah. And similarly, sorry if I could just, with that mitigation fund, landlord mitigation fund, I mean, clearly if there's some larger developers building larger projects, housing more and more people, they're more likely to have some of these same challenges. And the more folks we can get on board, the more the fund grows, right? It's like any sort of social benefit insurance fund, if you will. The more people participating, the more robust and useful it is. So thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair, and thank you for that platform for us to ask a few questions. Very quickly, there are 2 slides that I love. One is prevention, and one is diversion. Very similar programs, and both programs can be relatively inexpensive per household to administer. Sometimes, as we've identified, sometimes it's just a shortage of food in a household, and if we can address that, then it becomes it is a diversion program. It keeps people in housing rather than putting them on the street or out of the front door. So many different ways to do it. So diverse and really quite innovative. Kate, you and the team have really brought that forward, both prevention and diversion. Thank you.
All right, well, I will move forward and provide a quick update regarding All In. As you may recall, on January 10th, Governor Kotek declared an emergency due to homelessness and allocated dollars specifically to the defined HUD continuums of care throughout the state of Oregon, Lane County being one of those continuums of care. And so we have been working since March to firstly create a community plan with how we would use the estimated all-in dollars, and then to move that plan forward once we had an understanding of what our allocation would be. I will also make a note that last week the governor allocated funds to the balance of state communities. So all of those dark green communities now also have all-in dollars and identified outcomes that they're working toward too. So it is indeed an all-county effort. So this is the allocation of all-in dollars that we received, approximately $3 million for prevention, namely rent assistance and case management, and then about $15.5 million for rehousing, street outreach, the database that we track outcomes in, the homeless management information system, and emergency shelter. So most recently, we have created contracts for the 13 agencies that we are working with. And at this point, all those contracts are executed except for one. There's one agency where we're not sure if their project is going to be able to move forward. And so they're holding off on signing the contract. We'll continue to work with them, and it is for emergency shelter. And so there is a bit more flexibility on the timeline. The programs have begun serving individuals, with the exception of that one that doesn't have a contract. And we have a dashboard that's been created that helps staff, the agencies, as well as the community have an understanding of where they are in meeting their respective outcomes and the community outcome. And I'll share that with you in a moment. This is just a further breakdown of the funding of the all-in dollars by program type. You have that prevention, emergency shelter, which encompasses new emergency shelter beds. For example, there are beds that will be placed in the Florence area that will be new, as well as improving alternative shelters that hadn't yet met the definition of emergency shelter. Often, there needs to be showers on site or regular food access that just hadn't existed before. And then rehousing assistance, which involves supporting someone who is unsheltered to move into permanent housing. And then lastly, outreach, which is very much housing focused, engaging individuals, understanding what their barriers to housing are, and then helping them move through those barriers and access both emergency shelter and rehousing supports. So I mentioned the dashboard. And Commissioner Lovell, I bet you can't see the dashboard. Is that the case?
No, I can see it.
Oh, great. Thank you. All right.
You mean the slide?
Oh. We're not seeing it either yet.
Okay. Let me.
You can actually click on the dashboard in the board material. If you click on that, that'll bring the dashboard up on your own PC.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Mm-hmm. So if you look at the slide that says all in dashboard, there's a link. There's a link on there. Now we see two of you.
There we go.
Lucky you.
Okay, so this is the public-facing dashboard that was created, again, thanks to our data and analytics unit here in Health and Human Services. And it firstly focuses on the 3 outcomes that we are charged with achieving for all in. The prevention assistance, where we are to serve 741 households and successfully exit them to stability, to serve 247 households in rehousing and move them from unsheltered houselessness to permanent housing, and then to also create 230 new emergency shelter beds here in the community. And you can see that that is going very well. Because many of the new shelters that we were creating were improving the alternative shelters, that has been kind of a rapid pace, which has allowed us to move quickly in creating those beds and more importantly, making sure that people are in those beds. So if someone were to click on one of these dashboards, it brings you to a breakdown of the different agencies who are working to achieve the collective outcome. So this is focused on prevention, and you can see, for example, Centro Latino Americano, they have served 8 households and achieved 33% of the 24 households that they've agreed to serve. It's important to know with this dashboard that it only reports households when the agency has actually exited the household successfully. And so, for example, households that are actively being served through Centro's prevention program are not showing up on this dashboard. Once that household is exited and they exit positively, so if they fall into homelessness, they don't count. And so if they exit positively, then they show up on the dashboard. And so there are many more households that are being served right now that are not on this dashboard because we don't know the outcome of their experience yet. And then lastly, there are demographics that we have taken a closer look at. And these particular demographics, if someone has a disability, their gender, as well as their race and ethnicity, is because in Lane County, there are populations that are absolutely disproportionately affected by houselessness, people with disabilities, for example. And so as a part of the all-in efforts, we are working to ensure that we are serving at the very least the percentage of people with disabilities that reside here in Lane County, and making sure that we are not leaving any population to receive less assistance than their overall demographic makeup that they have here in the county.
Can you also speak to why, if someone goes to the state data website, it might look different from ours?
Sure. So primarily, ours is updated on a weekly basis, whereas the state's dashboard is updated monthly and is 2 months behind. And so it is just looking at 2 different data sets completely. And we chose to kind of just look at it more actively simply because, it's important to track the data. And the multi-agency coordinating group is meeting twice a month, for example, and we look at this data every meeting to see where we are and to talk about how we might be able to make improvements.
And that meeting is tomorrow at noon.
Indeed.
Can I just say while you're shifting slides, just to the point earlier about things like if you have a room, you look at the homelessness prevention and it's just literally graphically clear that the majority of people are women who do not have disabling conditions, for example. It's just, if people are thinking about a room in their home. Sorry, Chair.
No, that's good.
Thank you. So just to share with all of you, the all-in dollars that we are working with today, they end on January 10th of 2024. And last time I visited, we weren't quite sure what would be next. Since then, the legislature has allocated through SB 5511 an additional, what I often refer to as bucket of dollars that runs from January 11th of 2024 through June 30 of 2025. So that's very exciting because it means that we will be able to continue the vast majority of the all-in projects through the end of the biennium. At this point, we're just aware of the total allocation statewide of dollars that we're going to be receiving. We don't know what Lane County is going to receive, but the dollars are large enough at this point where we do feel good that the majority of the programs will be able to continue. So that's fantastic. And so if anyone's interested in more information about All In, we do have a Lane County webpage that folks are welcome to go to, and you can also access the dashboard under the Outcomes accordion on that page. So that's everything I have about that. Happy to field questions or continue.
Just that last slide had the far left cut off, so if you're able to how to upload a different one for Diana, the one with the big green chart.
Oh, sure.
Can't see the
It
investment
says millions, but not how many millions.
Thank you. I'll work on that.
Very general.
All right. Well, I will conclude here just with a quick update regarding the River Avenue Navigation Center. And as I hope you're aware, a number of years ago, there was what we refer to as a TAC report. And Lane County invited consultants to come and assess where there are opportunities for improvement within the homelessness system. And one major opportunity was this identified 75-bed shelter for individuals who have high needs and are houseless. And so the Navigation Center opened September 12th of last year, so it's just been open for about 1 year. And it is continuing to build upon itself to achieve successes. It serves a very vulnerable population. And so it certainly had its bumps opening up, building staffing capacity, building partnerships, which are integral in the success of the Navigation Center. But as the partnerships continue to grow, now that we have behavioral health staff there on site, we have home health care that comes, I shouldn't even say we, Equitable Social Solutions, the agency that is the operator of the Navigation Center, has built these partnerships to help the Navigation Center be successful. And so in partnership with the city of Eugene, Lane County contracts out this to Equitable Social Solutions. In the last fiscal year, and actually this is just the last 1 year, so from September 12th of 2022 to September 12th of 2023, the Navigation Center has served 225 unduplicated individuals, and they see that their clients tend to be white males, ages 22 to 25, having multiple disabilities and receiving no income. And again, they tend to take folks who have much higher needs, have very high housing assessment scores, particularly so that the programs who serve individuals like permanent supported housing or rapid rehousing are able to identify where their clients are and work with them in a much more efficient fashion than needing to kind of find them around town. So one way that I can see that the Navigation Center is serving people who have high needs is based on that housing assessment or the vulnerability assessment. And this literally looks at who is likely to die while living on the street. And so the Navigation Center serves the vast majority of people who score an 8 or above, which is a rather high score. They also have a very high percentage of people who score 13 and above, and those folks are very much in need of permanent supported housing.
We have a question.
Sure.
On that particular graphic on the left that you're explaining, what are the accesses, what are they labeled? Because I'm not really sure what I'm looking at with the 1 to 120 or the 0 or.
Sure, thank you. And so for example, the 8 to 12 is the vulnerability assessment score. And there are 113 individuals that were in the Navigation Center and had that assessment score. Thank you. So the other chart shows the exits of people from the Navigation Center. And as we discussed earlier, transitioning people out of shelters and into permanent housing is a high priority for the shelters. And so something that we track closely. With the Navigation Center, we saw 26% of those who exited the facility exited in a positive way to permanent housing or with family or friends on a permanent tenure. 21% of the residents moved to a different emergency shelter. And sometimes that's a positive thing. And sometimes it is just a neutral type of a change that needed to happen at the client's request. And then we did have 53% of those who exited in a negative way, basically going back to the street, or that they exited the shelter and no one knew where it is that they went. So that would be a negative exit as well. And so this is an area of improvement for the Navigation Center, just like it is for the other emergency shelters in the community.
A question, Kate?
Thank you. Is something like someone exiting to a adult foster home or something like that, or some kind of residential treatment program for substance use disorder or mental illness, is that considered to shelter or to permanent housing?
So with the adult care home, that would be permanent housing. Inpatient treatment, it wouldn't, in that our hope is that they would actually come back into shelter, or that they would transition to a more appropriate site. But that would be, it would actually be a neutral exit, not positive. And we utilize HUD standards on kind of how we determine if something is a positive exit versus a negative exit.
And that was going to be my next question. So somebody, for instance, who exits to a community supported shelters Conestoga hut is, because those don't meet HUD habitability standards, they don't count as exiting to shelter?
That would be correct. Yes.
Thank you. But as a part of All In, we are upgrading some of those non-traditional HUD-supported shelters into supported shelters, but that's a different discussion.
But that's part of that 32%.
It is, yes. Further questions?
Just so I'm reading this right, the pie chart is showing, permanent, they're exiting approximately 26% to permanent housing, and another section is exiting to other HUD qualified shelter for 21%. So we're seeing a total of 47% actually going to some kind of habitable shelter of some kind.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I think that's pretty great.
And I think you're right. That's, yeah. It's not, 26% doesn't even make a great Major League Baseball player, but 26% in this regard is 26% of people who otherwise most likely would be still on the street, so. Yep.
And we are fortunate that we've grown the number of shelters in the community to a place where there's much greater diversity of shelters. And so, clients rightfully, have an interest in maybe going to one and not being in another. And so, continually providing opportunities for the shelters to partner and be able to make seamless transitions as clients would like to see that happen. So just a few other updates around the Navigation Center. They have introduced culturally responsive peer support services. And so this is, peer is someone who has experienced houselessness, often is in recovery, and, it might be from substance abuse or mental health symptoms or both. And so this has been really instrumental in helping stabilize the individuals in the Navigation Center. Equitable Social Solutions has added transportation options, so they now have a vehicle to be able to move folks, bring them to appointments or bring them to, be able to get their ID, for example, at the DMV. And that has been very helpful, particularly because many of the residents have pretty significant mobility challenges, and getting onto the bus is pretty daunting for them. They've also created internship opportunities through the University of Oregon, many different staff trainings and technical assistance. The menu was something that in the beginning needed to be worked through, and they now have a much broader array of food options for clients, especially related to those whose teeth may not be able to chew solid foods, or folks who may have specific dietary needs. And then also have partnered with a firm to have 24/7 security available, particularly on the outside of the facility. And that was actually at the request of the residents, feeling like they were, they shared as a part of their resident meetings that they felt like that would help them feel safer within the space. And so it just helps provide additional eyes and ears within the kind of premise. So they've worked really hard to create opportunities for former residents to engage. It can be very lonely when someone transitioned out to their own home or even to shared housing. And so they now have welcomed back a few former residents to volunteer. They've created a community cleanup day where the neighborhood associations are invited, the residents are invited, and they help to pick up the area around the Navigation Center, though I hear it might actually move throughout the neighborhoods as well. They have a fantastic partnership with Peace Health to welcome in home health aides because of the significant health needs of the residents. This has been very helpful in just making sure that the kind of minor needs of the residents are being met and kind of sounding the alarms if there are concerns about a resident who needs a higher level of care. And then they also have been able to just work in partnership with the two neighborhood associations, have developed a good neighbor agreement in partnership with the city of Eugene as well. And I understand are very close to having that be fully signed and that all are in agreement with it. So a lot of really positive steps to create a space where, all feel safe and welcomed and can move forward in their quest for more stable housing. I just wanted to share one story with you. This is one that Equitable Social Solutions put up on LinkedIn recently. I thought I'll share it. But this gentleman had been houseless for over 20 years and had been engaged by a street outreach team who said, hey, what do you think about going into the Navigation Center? And he liked what he heard and was willing to give it a try. And after he moved in, he became engaged in Alcoholics Anonymous groups, both that were offered within the Navigation Center and then outside, and it got to the point where he was ready to move out into his own home. He now is giving back to the Navigation Center and to other local community agencies, and they also shared that he's contemplating getting a four-legged friend. So that's fantastic, and one of many very positive stories that are coming out of the Navigation Center, much to the credit to the residents.
Well, thank you, Kate.
Yes.
A great presentation on both All In and on the Navigation Center. I'll turn to the board for questions or comments at this point in time. Commissioner Buck.
Question on the programmatic updates. I was wondering, did we add that nurse on site or nursing option or healthcare worker in the building? Because I thought we were talking about that last time I had a chance to walk through.
So we haven't, and it really is just that there haven't been dollars identified. That was, one of the strengths of Peace Health being able to come. And then I know that ESS is continuing to work on creating partnerships particularly with Whitebird, to offer primary care to the residents there.
I can add a little bit to this that you probably don't even know yet, but I get the opportunity to connect with Suzanne Roloff frequently. She's our Chief Operating Officer for the federally qualified, or for the CHC clinics. And we are in the midst of a recruiting boom. So cross your fingers that this boom really does result in a whole bunch of signed employment agreements. But we are anticipating running out of space in our clinics prior to South Lane Clinic opening. And we are also looking at some other options for clinic opening. So Suzanne is hopeful that she would be able to assign a primary care provider to the Navigation Center for, not full-time, but periodically, week to week. And if the plan all works out, it should take place sometime this fall or winter.
Wonderful, because I was pretty excited about having that opportunity there in the Navigation Center, because people come in with lots of stuff and they need somebody to talk to. And although it's wonderful to have the in-home partnership, I just never know when that might go away. And with our clinic facilities and our staff, and hopefully you have enough staff now looking at being able to open the South Lane Clinic, that if we have additional staff available and you're able to bill properly in order to staff it, that's excellent news. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Further questions, comments? Vice Chair Trieger?
Thank you. I'll just say, you kind of glossed over, but you said something about some of the improvements there were feedback from residents during their resident meetings. So I just really appreciate that there really is a community there, that folks living there really are developing a sense of community, which I also really appreciated when you said that some folks, when they transition out to independent living, get lonely. They rely on that community. And so I love that positive feedback loop that then they're coming back to volunteer and provide that kind of peer leadership and support to others. So there's a wonderful thing. There's so much more than just a roof over the head and meals and laundry happening there. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair. I'll just add this, that regarding the Navigation Center, we didn't know what to expect. We knew what we'd like, and we knew that if we built the facility, then we'd grow into the facility. And I believe we have a good contractor there who is helping grow into the facility. And, the first couple of times I visited, the main complaint was the peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. Well, you've addressed that, because people with special needs, including needs that we typically don't consider ourselves an inability to chew food, for instance. Addressing those needs really make it a much more livable situation for the people who are there, and the results are tangible. So thank you. I see no further questions. Thanks for a wonderful set of reports. And the slides that you've given to us today, we can use those slides. Not cut and paste, but cut and use those slides in our own personal presentations that we may be given to other groups. So thank you very much. The first time we had a housing report we didn't know what to expect. And what's happened is this has materialized into a very comprehensive report that is very usable, not just for today's presentation, but for us to move down the road. So thank you very much. Superb work. Excellent, Brianna. Thank you very much for being here today. A good presentation. See you tomorrow. Thank you. Thank you, Derek. And we're moving toward the end of today's meeting, Mr. Morgajewski. We have commissioners' business. Any announcements from commissioners? I am seeing none at this point in time. I've had a chance to make announcements throughout the day. A future board assignment request, I telegraphed one earlier, Mr. Morgajewski. In the meantime, in the interim, you have answered my questions that I had, so I personally do not have an assignment request. Vice Chair Trieger.
Thank you, Chair. I have two. I also just want to say, I feel like today's meeting, it's been kind of packed, but a lot of what we've heard today answers the questions a lot of us get. What's being done about fill in the blank in this community? What's being done about homelessness? What's happening upriver with the rebuild? So this is a great meeting for that. I have two assignment requests that I seek head nods. One is, I don't have a timing in mind. I would leave this to Director Gray and the county administrator, but I think it would be really good for us to hear a report back on the impacts and specifically the county response to the closure of Peace Health University District, what we're anticipating we need to put in place to help fill service gaps, and just whatever Director Gray and our administrator think is appropriate, but I think something to come back to us in a public session with a report on the impacts of that would be welcome, if I have at least two other colleagues who agree.
Can I just offer an update on that? Eve and I have talked about in our planning, I think tentatively, I worked with Ms. Jones October 25th is a Wednesday. I think we were tentatively shooting for, if I'm not mistaken, October 25th for a work session with the board for a couple hours to really dive into some of the topics you heard, gosh, was that this morning? On the I know.
It's been a long week today.
You know, the safety concerns at our behavioral health facility and issues there, the broader net with the stabilization center, and the broader network of issues around civil commitment and aid and assist populations and the role of OHA in determining waivers and all of this stuff. So that may or may not answer what you're looking for, but that definitely will be a focus of the conversation. Part of the reason we're wanting to come back to have this conversation, we sort of started that thinking we'd update the board on the stabilization center because, you know, and we'll provide more of this information later. Obviously, we're in the process of doing the RFP for the youth stabilization center, but we've sort of been in a state of flux or on the adult side for various issues. And then this announcement from Peace Health came out, and it's really thrown the whole system into chaos, frankly. So we wanted to come back to the board and sort of talk about that whole system and the complexity of it and what these decisions do. So I think that conversation, you know, it's like one of these things that you talk about when you have to sort of talk about 5 different things all together because it is part of a system. So I don't know if that sort of gets to what you want to get to or not.
I think for the time being, that will be good in that time frame. I'm anticipating there may be, and maybe some of it will come out of that meeting, other opportunities for us to hear about partnerships we may be facilitating or programs we may be even considering implementing to help fill some of the service gaps that'll be left.
Yeah, because, you know, this gets to obviously in order to run a behavioral health unit, a secure behavioral health unit where you can hold people, you have to have a hospital connected to it. And so that's part of the issue with the BHU here in Eugene. And so, you know, so all those pieces are part of what we wanted to talk about in addition to, you know, the stabilization center and the other pieces of the system. So very complex, which is why we'll take a couple hours to talk about it. And yeah, so that's the plan, I think, October 25th.
Great, thank you. And then the other was we received an email from the area manager for the ODOT, for our region for ODOT, asking to come present. And there's been a bit of back and forth with Mr. Francis, and I asked if there was time sensitivity. He said not particularly, sometime in October would be good. I think he's very focused on design projects and construction. So if there's interest from others on the board in having an update from ODOT, personally, for me, I would like us to, if there is, ask him to also be ready to maybe answer some questions or talk about partnership with the MLK campus and any of the issues with ODOT property adjacent there. I think in his mind, he's thinking infrastructure, construction projects, roadways. But I think if we're going to have Mr. Francis to the table, we might want to have more of a conversation about some other issues as well.
Is that scheduled? Did I?
No, he
you're-
requested time
You requested, I
for
saw
us.
the email that came through.
Yeah.
So as we schedule that, you're just asking for, that would be really helpful to know from the board
Yeah.
what are the topics that you'd like to discuss in addition to what ODOT would like to talk about.
Yeah, I responded to him just to help with managing some expectations that the timeline he proposed and the duration of presentation might not be able to be met, but that I would query and guessed we would have agreement that we want to hear from him. It's just going to be a matter of working with staff on the scope of the presentation and timing and scheduling, so.
And I'd say you have an agreement that that is of interest. And the details of it really need to be ironed out as far as, there are so many things that ODOT is involved in.
Yeah. So just to be clear, the request is to follow up on scheduling the ODOT representative to present to the board in a future meeting.
Yeah, and in that coordination that staff does with Mr. Francis and his team to make clear that there may be some conversation other than the things he's wanting to bring to us around construction and transportation projects.
And, you know, prior to COVID, when Franny Brindle had that job, we got to see Franny Brindle pretty often and making presentations, whether it be at MPC or other places. We've had a lot of constraints in that, and I think that Mr. Francis is really feeling a disconnect with the Board of County Commissioners and would like to make sure that we understand that he is a partner, that they are still a partner, as they've always been. Excellent. Any further assignment requests? I'm seeing none, Mr. Mokrajski, so can you review assignments?
So assuming that my comments about the October 25th work session regarding the emergency healthcare or emergency hospital, behavioral health stabilization center resolves that, and then I'm not going to add that as an assignment. So the one I have is to work with the ODOT representative to coordinate a date for an update, including various topics that would be of interest to Lane County in addition to the ones that were stated by ODOT.
That sounds like a complete review of assignments, Mr. Mokrajski. I see no additions or questioning glances surrounding that. We'll move down to executive session. We have no need for executive session this afternoon. We do have a board meeting tomorrow morning, a regular board meeting at 9 a.m. So after we conclude today's meeting, we'll go into recess. And we have a 9 a.m. Community Justice and Rehabilitation meeting, and that is in Harris Hall. That will take place here in Harris Hall tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Any other business before we recess today's meeting? Commissioner Lovell, thank you for joining us throughout the miles. What time is it where you are?
We're approaching 2:30 a.m.
So you're 2:30 tomorrow. Take a nap.
Yeah.
If you've not had dinner yet, grab
Tomorrow
some.
about 2:30, I'll be catching an airplane back, so the meeting's got to be briefer than today, I hope.
Then with that, we are in recess.
Amen.